For some background, I'm a female and was a junior in high school at the time of this story. The school I went to was fairly large and had lots of other students. I would say that I had a decent amount of other friends, and my locker was near several of them. Each grade kind of had their lockers together in a certain area. The juniors were in a large locker common area near the science department. It was sort of at one end of the school. So the story really begins one day when I was at my locker in between classes. None of my friends were really around at that time, and there was a little space between me and everybody else. It would get extremely crowded during some times of the day there, so much so that it was hard to even open the lockers sometimes. It was nice that it wasn't busy this time, but then I noticed that there was this guy standing near my locker. I had never seen him before, and wasn't sure where he had come from. I assumed that he was a senior because he looked older. He approached me when I was at my locker and said hi. Then he proceeded to start a conversation with me. He asked me to skip class and leave school with him, saying we could hang out. Now, I didn't even know this guy, and I took school very serious, so I did not want to skip. I told him no, I had to go to class, and I said that he should do the same. He asked me to hang out with him after school then, and I said no, I was busy. I really did not want to hang out with him at all and was not interested. I then left the guy and said that I had to go to class now. He was still at my locker when I walked away. For the rest of that school day, I didn't see him, but the next day, he was back. I got done with the class and went to my locker only to find him there. He was standing right in front of it, kind of blocking it from me. I asked him to move, and he started asking to hang out again. He knew my name somehow, and I kept telling him that I didn't want to hang out. Luckily, this time, some of my friends were around. When he didn't move, several of them asked him, and he finally did. After he left, I asked my friends who he was, and none of them knew anything about him. We all just assumed that he was a senior, and I just hoped that he would leave me alone. Well, later that day, after school, I was stopping at my locker before going home. When I did, the same guy was there. This time, he asked if I needed a ride home, and of course, I said no. I drove to and from school every day. He tried convincing me, but I just walked away from him. Then I left school. Now, after this, I did not see him for a while, but I found out that he did not even go to our school. Apparently, he had tried getting several other girls to hang out with him as well. One of them reported him for harassment after he apparently followed her into a restroom. That's when they found out he wasn't a student. Nobody really knew who he was until like a week or two later. One of my friends showed me this news story online. It was of an attempted kidnapping of a local woman, which luckily the woman got away. The man was caught, and I saw that it was the same guy. It turns out he was 23 and not even in high school at all. No wonder he looked older. I really couldn't believe it, and I feel grateful that everybody ended up being all right and that the man was caught. When I was in high school, I played football and baseball. During the wintertime, I would be in before-school weightlifting. This particular story took place my sophomore year. One day, my mom dropped me off early at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Our lifting went from 6:30 to 7:30, so it was a very early day for me. I went in the entrance that I always did, which was on the east side of the school. It was the easiest for my mom to just drive up and drop me off at. It also happened to be the complete opposite end of the school from where the gym was, so when I walked to lifting, it would always be very quiet. On this day, however, when I passed by the social studies hallway, I noticed that the teacher's lounge light was on, and I could see right in. That was rare because the lounges had blinds that were almost always down, and I had never really seen into one. It got my attention, so I walked over to the window and looked inside. I saw a few couches and a microwave. Typical stuff, but then I saw a man in there. He wasn't a teacher from our school though. He was facing a bookshelf and appeared to be looking through the books, but by the way he was dressed and the looks of him, he didn't seem to be a teacher or a high school worker. He was wearing just a t-shirt and jeans and didn't look very well put together. Still, I was tired and figured he must work for the school or something, and I went on with my walk to lifting.
After weightlifting, I went to my daily classes, and it was a pretty normal day. That is until second hour, when out of nowhere, we got an announcement over the school intercom that we were on a lockdown. I was in English class, and the teacher locked the door and told us all to remain seated. None of us knew what was going on, and we all asked a lot of questions, but couldn't get a clear answer. Things grew very quiet, and I could tell by the look on my teacher, Mrs. Anderson's face, that it was serious. She ended up turning off the lights in our classroom. There was only about 15 kids in my class, and probably 400 in the whole school, so we knew this had to be fairly serious. We remained seated and were completely silent for what felt like a long time. At one point, we saw the silhouette of a man walk in front of our door, but couldn't tell who he was, and then he walked away. We heard some shouting only a couple of minutes later, and after about 20 more minutes, the lockdown was finally lifted. I later came to find out that the man that I had seen in the teacher's lounge was a former student who had graduated about 10 years prior. He was high on drugs and angry at one of the social studies teachers for some reason. He had hid under a couch in the teacher's lounge until the teacher came in and he attacked him. He then ran out into the halls, causing the lockdown, but was caught by police shortly after. I felt bad that I hadn't reported the man earlier, and I told the principal my story. She said that it wasn't my fault, and the teacher who was attacked was just fine and had no serious injuries.
This happened back when I was in high school. It had to be either my freshman or sophomore year, because those were the only 2 years that I rode the bus. School started at 7:45 a.m., but the bus would come by my stop to pick me up at 6:30. Well, it was supposed to be 6:30, but the bus would often show up at more like 6:50 or even 7. To get to the bus stop, I would walk down my street to the end of it. Then the bus would stop there and I would get on. I was the only kid at that particular stop who rode the bus, and there weren't any other stops in the immediate area. It was a pretty quiet area because in my neighborhood, the yards were a little bigger and the houses farther apart. There was less traffic on the roads as well, especially at those hours. Across the street from the bus stop were some woods and houses spread out pretty far. So one morning, I walked down my street to the end where the bus stop was. I got there at about 6:30, but figured I would probably be waiting for a good 10 or 20 minutes like normal. I'm not sure why the bus was always so late, because my stop was only the third one of the morning. Every now and then the bus would show up perfectly on time though, so you could never depend on it to be late. So I stood out there in the dark because the sun hadn't come up yet. It was very quiet and there were no other cars on the roads at all. I waited and waited. I was pretty tired from having to get up so early like I often was in high school. Then I noticed headlights in the distance. I figured that it had to be my bus. When it came closer, I noticed that it was in fact a bus, but not mine. It looked different. It slowed down when it got closer to me. Then I noticed that this was not the typical bus. My bus was the normal standard yellow school bus, but this one was like a really light yellow, almost white. It was slightly shorter than usual and looked older and more beat up. Now, in the past, one time we had a different bus for whatever reason, and I had a substitute bus driver once as well, so I thought that maybe that was the case. But when that happened, the bus had actually looked newer and in better shape. Something about this just gave me a bad feeling. The bus slowed down even more, and then came to a stop right across the street from me for me to get on. I did not cross the street. I started to get a bad feeling like I should not get on the bus. I looked and could see the driver. It was not the usual bus driver that we had. This guy had a dark gray and also part black beard. He was wearing a hat as well and looked over at me. I just kept standing there. Then he waved at me to get on the bus. I almost went. I think I might have even took a step, but I thought better of it. I stayed where I was and then waved for the bus to go forward without me. It did not. The bus driver had the door open and he shouted for me to get on. I looked in the windows and could see that there appeared to not be any other kids on the bus at all. Normally there would be 3 other kids on the bus at that point, as I was the third stop and one of the stops before me had 2 kids at it, so this was just really weird. I said no and then turned around and started to walk away. I was going back towards my house, and then something unexpected happened. As I was walking back down my street, I heard the bus turn onto my street behind me. I looked back and it was indeed going onto my street, something that had never happened before. At that point, I started to run. That's when the bus stopped. I then heard the beeping as it backed up and then turned around and went back onto the busier road in the direction that it had come from. I was so confused. I stopped and then went back to the bus stop, feeling really creeped out now. That bus was nowhere in sight anymore as it had drove away. I stood there in silence, wondering what had just happened. I was glad that I didn't get on that bus though. I figured that if it was somehow the bus I was supposed to be on, I could tell my mom that I missed it and she would drive me to school. That's something that happened a few times before, and even though it took my mom out of the way to get to her job, she could still do it. I stood there at the bus stop and the time approached 6:50. Then I saw more headlights. Another bus drove down the street. I thought at first that it was the same bus coming back, but it wasn't. This was actually my correct bus, the same one as usual. I saw a few students on already, and the bus stopped for me. I crossed the street and got on. It was the normal bus driver and students. I don't think I was ever so happy to see them before. I got on the bus, went to my seat, and then rode the bus to school, wondering what would have happened had I got on that other bus. I never saw that other bus again. To this day, I wonder who it was driving it and why he drove to my stop. Was it something innocent, like a substitute bus driver who just got lost or got his route mixed up or something? Or was it something terrible, like a kidnapper trying to pose as a bus driver? I'm not sure, but I'm so glad that I listened to my instincts and didn't get on that bus. The story I'm about to share with you all started when I was a freshman in high school. I had gotten to know a lot of kids and met this one kid named TJ who happened to be on the baseball and football team with me. Keep in mind, I had only known him for a few months. One day, sometime during the first few months of my freshman year, I decided to go to TJ's house. I went with my other friend who I had known since I was young. We'll call him Finn. Key details to the story is I had been to TJ's house a few times before and slept over several times as well. His parents knew me, and my parents knew TJ's parents. When I got to TJ's house, we waited for Finn to get dropped off. When he did, we all decided to go to a nearby school because some of TJ's friends were supposedly goofing off on the roof of the school. When TJ's friends he knew weren't there, we decided to walk to the other side of the neighborhood TJ lived in. To get to the other side of the neighborhood, we cut through a community college that was small. At this point, I did not know where we were going and asked TJ, but he didn't give me a response. My phone was about to die, and I told TJ this, and he said that I could charge it later. As we were halfway through the community college, we surprisingly ran into 5 friends of TJ's. 3 of them I had briefly met once before, and they were the type of people where bad follows them. The other 2 friends of TJ's were kids I had never seen before or met. I asked TJ where we were going, and he said one of his friend's house. I got a weird feeling, as my phone was dead at this point and it was dark out. I was walking when one of TJ's friends thought I was talking bad about his mom, but I hadn't said a word about his mom at all. Then TJ insisted that I did, and shortly after, TJ and his other friends insisted that we fought. Mind you, Finn, my good friend, did not say anything and stood there not knowing what to do. I've been in fights before and can hold my ground. One of TJ's friends at this point was circling me and got in my face and shoved me. I turned, and his friend threw a punch at me and missed, and then I felt someone punch me with my back turned. I eventually tossed one of the guys to the ground and had him pinned, but the other guy then kicked at me. The guy I had pinned down was now on top of me and punched me, and one of my contacts fell out and I couldn't see. I finally got up and was bleeding from the eye when TJ and 2 of his friends insisted we go round 2 and started placing bets. I finally walked away, and as I was, TJ took a photo of me, and somebody else I guess had a video of the fight. Later on, it got passed around everyone on the baseball team, and everybody was angry at TJ for not helping me. Anyways, we eventually walked back to TJ's house where Finn's mom was waiting to pick him up. The parents found out I was in a fight, but was more worried about TJ than me, and I was bleeding. My parents found out and were mad. We filed a police report on one of TJ's friends that basically assaulted me and attacked me. Days later, TJ was taken to a mental hospital because he allegedly wanted to come to school and shoot me in the back of the head in class. I took him to court for a restraining order, but the judge did not pass it and told us to make up and get over it. I realized that I was lured into the dark area of the community college to most likely get harmed. Finn did not help me, and I haven't talked to him since. I've blocked TJ on everything and haven't seen him since either. I hope TJ doesn't do this to anyone else again, but it's a lesson that you might not know a friend as well as you think. During senior year of high school, my friend, who I'll call Jake, and I had a terrifying encounter. Jake's parents were out of town, and he had a decently big house, so we threw a party that weekend. The party wasn't anything too crazy, just about 30 or 40 people from our grade. Jake was my best friend and also my neighbor. I lived a couple of houses down from him, so I helped him set up and make sure that nothing that could break was out in the open. We also blocked off the stairs that led to the upper levels of the house so that the party could be contained to the main floor and basement. All the people showed up right around the same time, and the party was underway. It ended up being a fun party. There was music and dancing downstairs, and games being played upstairs like Mario Kart and other things. As the night wore on, I found myself having to pee really bad. The bathroom on the main floor and the one in the basement were both in use, so even though it was freezing outside, I went out to pee in the backyard. While I was back there by a tree, I happened to look back towards Jake's big house. Way up on the 3rd floor, I very quickly saw a flicker of light. After I finished, I didn't see the light again, but I strained my eyes looking up at the windows and I could see somebody moving around. When I went back inside, I found Jake and brought up to him that somebody was upstairs. As mentioned earlier, Jake's parents were gone, and he didn't have any other siblings who would still be up there, so it was somebody who wasn't supposed to be up there. Jake concluded that somebody from the party probably made their way up there, even though we had blocked off the stairs and put up a sign saying not to go up there. I offered to go with Jake, and we headed up the stairs expecting to find somebody from our high school, someone that was maybe looking for another bathroom, or a guy and girl who wanted someplace for private. Anyway, we checked all the rooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor until we got to his parents' bedroom. We opened the bedroom door to find a man looking through the closet drawers. His face was covered, so we couldn't make out much about him. He clearly had not heard us coming from the carpeted floors, because he whipped around very surprised and raised a gun towards both of us. Taken aback, we instantly threw our hands up saying don't shoot. He did not say a word, he just motioned for us to move out of the way of the door, and then proceeded to leave out the door once we were far enough out of the way. On his way past, he pistol whipped my friend Jake in the face before running down the hallway, down the stairs, and out the front door. We knew this because people who were up in the living room for the party saw him dash right past them and then out the door and saw him run down the street into the darkness. Looking back years later in hindsight, we definitely should have called the cops, but at the time we were kids hosting a party. There were some people at the house who were drinking that were underage, and we didn't want to get in trouble for that. Jake's face ended up being alright, but it took a bit longer to recover from the trauma of being held at gunpoint by who we assumed was a robber, unless something else was going on that we missed. I'm going to tell you a story that happened back when I was in high school. This was during my junior year. My name is Kendall, and when I was in high school, I would describe myself as a pretty average student. I had a friend group of a few other people that I would talk to on a regular basis. The high school that I went to was relatively big. I'm not sure exactly how many students went there total, but it was probably over 1,000. Most of my classes, I would have at least one of my friends in it, but not quite all of them. I remember there was this one science class that I was in during the first semester of junior year, and I didn't really have any friends in it. This meant that when we did group projects, which we did a lot, I would just have to kind of join a group that I was sitting near. That's when I met this one guy named Ronnie. Ronnie was in a group that I was in with 3 other people. We were doing some science experiment, and I got to know everybody in the group a little better. Ronnie came across to me as a little strange. He would say things that were just plain weird or inappropriate, and I know a lot of high school kids are weird and inappropriate, but he kind of crossed the line a bit. He normally would sit right behind me in class, and after the group project, he would occasionally talk to me. For the most part, he was nice to me, and I was nice to him, but he would still say some strange things that I really didn't know how to respond to. I also noticed that he skipped class quite a bit. For the rest of the semester, though, everything was fine. I remember that towards the beginning of 2nd semester, Ronnie followed me on Instagram and added me on Facebook. I no longer had any classes with him. Not long after adding me on social media, he started sending me messages. They started out fairly normal, but when he asked me to hang out and I told him that I was busy, he called me a liar. Now, I didn't really want to hang out with him, but the first time he asked, I legitimately was busy on the day that he asked. Did I use that as an excuse? Yes, I didn't want to hang out with him. I guess he had a feeling that I would say no because he got pretty angry. When he did, I didn't respond to him. I figured that things would be left at that, but a few days later, he started messaging me again. He sent me another message, and I didn't respond. Then he started basically spamming me with more and more messages. When this happened, I had to block him. I blocked him across all social media platforms, and it seemed to work. I didn't hear from him, and within about a week, I had forgotten all about it. Then, one day, we had just gotten out of school for the day and I was leaving. At the time, I drove to school in my car every day and parked in the students' parking lot, which was out the west exit. My car was a little bit older Jeep SUV, maybe 10 years old at the time, and the inside was a little bit messy. I walked out to my car like any other day and got inside. As soon as I sat down to start the engine, I saw something move in the back seat. It was Ronnie sitting up. He had been hiding inside my car, underneath a little pile of clothes I had in the back. When I noticed him, I screamed. He told me to shut up, and then started going on a rant about how bad of a person I was. I was really surprised by this situation. When I was able to realize exactly what was going on, I opened my door and ran away. I ran all the way back inside of the school. Then I found the first school employee that I could, which happened to be a teacher, and I told them about Ronnie being in my car. By the time we got back to my car, though, Ronnie was gone. In the end, he ended up getting expelled for the incident. I will spare you the details of him denying it and saying I made the whole thing up. It was frustrating, but luckily there were witnesses who backed up enough of the story for me. All I wanted was for him to leave me alone, which luckily he did. It's been over 5 years now, and I haven't seen or heard from him since then. When I was in high school during my junior year, I took an elective advanced computer class. It was not a very popular class and only had 5 students in it total. I was one of the 5, and our teacher was a really chill guy who was also the head basketball coach. My school had a really good basketball team, and he was always talking basketball and talking to the other coaches. We were all pretty good students, so he gave us a lot of independence. He would teach maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would work on the computers for the rest of the week. Not much would be said, and he would play music and let us work most of the time. And when we got done and had free time, we could just play around on the computers. There were times where either an assistant basketball coach would come into our classroom, or our teacher would leave and go to theirs. They would quietly talk strategy for literally the entire class period sometimes. It never bothered me. In fact, I liked it, because being able to just get my work done on the computer was nice. The teacher didn't care if we went around on our phones either. The classroom was a smaller computer lab, and it was kind of out of the way in one of the long hallways near the end of the school. One day, all 5 of us students arrived for class like usual. Our teacher went over the plan for the day, and then he said that he would be back in a bit. He was going to one of the assistant coaches' rooms to talk strategy again. All of us got to work and began doing our assignments. About 30 minutes later, there was an announcement over the school intercom. It said that the school was being locked down and for teachers to follow the lockdown procedures. After this, the 5 of us kind of looked around at each other. We were sort of confused as to what we should do. I didn't know if we were supposed to get up and go lock the door and stuff, or if our teacher would return. We all figured that he would be back soon though, so none of us did anything. After like 5 minutes went by, one of the other students got up and turned the lights off. We still figured that the teacher would come back soon though. After like 10 more minutes, there was still nothing. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. I expected it to be the teacher. A short time later, the door opened. We were all sitting at the back side of the classroom behind computers and facing the front. What we saw was a man enter the room who was not our teacher. I just remember that he had a messy beard, long stringy hair, and looked somewhat disheveled, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He entered the room and then took a few steps in. Then he looked around and seemed to notice us. As soon as he looked at us, he said, "Nobody say a word." The way he said it was really threatening. I was honestly pretty scared. The man paced back and forth, looking at us for a few seconds. Then he said, "Am I understood?" We all nodded our heads, not knowing what the guy was capable of. Then he walked over to the door and looked out of the window into the hallway. It looked like he was keeping watch and hiding. We all just sat there, frozen in fear pretty much. The guy would look out of the door window for a while, then pace around a little bit, look at us, then return to the door window. This went on for like 5 minutes. I didn't notice hearing anything else in the hallway during this time or anything. Then the man went to the door, opened it, and ran out. As soon as he was gone, another student ran over to the door and locked it. Then, I think we all called 911 at once. We reported the guy, knowing that he was more than likely the cause for the school lockdown. We were told that the police were there already and inside of the school searching for him. About 20 minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. Shortly after, our teacher returned. The man was caught and arrested after trying to escape the school. Why he was there in the first place, I never found out. Our teacher was watching film with another coach on the complete opposite end of the school. He tried to walk back to us, but the police stopped him, saying that he was walking where the suspicious man had been. The cops had been called earlier after another teacher saw the guy and he allegedly threatened him. So we were kinda left there wondering what to do, and unfortunately we did not lock the door. Thankfully, nobody was harmed though.
For some background of this story, I am a female, and this took place about 5 years ago during my junior year of high school. It was sometime in the first semester, and I was in my 5th hour class, which was drawing. They held all of the art classes at the oldest wing of the school, which had a different feel from the rest of it, and was kind of isolated from other parts of the school because it was only connected through one hallway at the end. It was darker and colder, and needed some updating from the chalkboards in the rooms to the old-fashioned lights. People would often start rumors that the wing was haunted, but I never believed them. On this day, when I was in class, I finished my drawing pretty early, and I knew that I would just be sitting there for the rest of the period, so I asked my teacher if I could go to the bathroom. She was a nice teacher and always said yes. I knew she didn't really care how long I was gone, as long as I made it back before the bell. I walked out of the classroom and down the hall and went to the girls' bathroom. This bathroom in the hallway also had an old-fashioned theme to it. It was near the end of the hall, and you had to go around a small corner to get to it. I'm not gonna lie, it was a kind of creepy bathroom, but I always liked it because other people rarely used it. Once inside, I went into one of the stalls. I was in there for maybe 20 or 30 seconds when I heard the bathroom door open and shut. I was a little surprised to hear somebody else coming in here at this time, and I looked underneath the stall to see some old rundown boots with black pants. Obviously I couldn't see much, but it didn't really look like a girl based on those shoes. There were several stalls in that bathroom, and I expected the person to go into one of them, but instead I heard them walk slowly closer and closer to me. As they did, I got a little bit uncomfortable. Then they stopped just in front of the stall that I was in. I could see through the cracks of the stall just barely who it was. It appeared to be a grown man. When I looked, he seemed to be looking through the stall right back at me. I didn't recognize him at all, and I knew he wasn't supposed to be in here. Then he tried opening the door, which of course I had locked. I sat there in shock, and my heart started pounding extremely fast. I was thinking of what I would do if he broke into the stall, and I knew I would have to try to get away from him. But after trying the door, the man stood there for a moment and then walked away slowly. I started to feel relieved, but instead of leaving the bathroom, the man just stopped in front of the exit and stood there. I could see his shoes on the floor just standing in front of the exit, blocking the doorway. I waited for a few moments hoping he would leave, but he just remained standing there next to the door. I decided to pull out my phone and text some of my friends who went to school with me. They were all in other classes, but finally I reached my friend David, who was on the football team, and he said he would come down and see what the man was up to. I was relieved once again when he said he was on his way, and I figured it would only take him a couple of minutes to arrive. The whole time that I waited, the man just kept standing there by the door. Just then, out of nowhere, all of the lights in the bathroom went off. It went completely dark in there, and I couldn't see a thing. I started to panic and braced myself for the man possibly trying to open the stall door again. Finally, at last, I heard the door open and heard the voice of my friend David. He said my name, and then he turned the lights back on. I heard some commotion, and I opened the stall door. I saw David leaving the bathroom behind the man. The man ended up running out of the school through an exit which was nearby. I saw David run to the exit and go outside, but he came back in shortly after and said that when he got outside, he didn't see anybody at all. I returned to class and reported the incident. I ended up having to talk to the principal, and those bathrooms ended up getting blocked off the next week.
Back when I was in high school, I remember that my friends and I found this secret room inside of the school. The room wasn't actually hidden or anything, but it was a classroom that was no longer used. Now it was vacant and just stored a bunch of random stuff in it. You see, the school that I went to was pretty old, but it had been renovated several times. This caused the overall layout to be somewhat strange, and this classroom was in the corner of a normally quiet hallway. It was not in an area that would normally get a lot of foot traffic. My friend Michael was the one that originally found it. I'm not sure how, but I guess he must have just been curious and tried opening the door. Apparently the lock on the door didn't work, so it would just open. So Michael, me, and 2 other friends are the ones who knew about it. We had a bit of a friend group, and we went in, and it was interesting to see all the stuff in there. It had some things from over 10 years ago, such as old assignments from various teachers and old equipment. There were box TVs that were on those stands with wheels, and old whiteboards as well. The room also had desks scattered about, and tons of books. It was quite cluttered, and had carpeted floors as well. So my friends and I would occasionally go into the room and hang out before school, between classes, during lunch, or other random times. It was just our secret hangout spot for the friend group. We were certain that nobody knew we were in there, and we made sure that nobody was looking whenever we went in, which was pretty easy. So one day, in between classes, I went there with 3 other friends. It was right before our last class of the day. Michael had told us to meet there in our friend group chat. He wanted to talk about some plans to hang out and play basketball over the weekend. So I remember that everybody left to go to their classes, except for me and Michael, because we had a class together and it was really close by. We were still sitting at desks and talking when we heard this sound come over the school intercom. It was strange because I didn't know what it was about, but shortly after, we heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. In my time in high school to that point, we had never had a lockdown before. I didn't really know what the reason for it was, but I was a little bit nervous. Obviously, in a lockdown, you're supposed to go to the nearest classroom and nobody's allowed to be in the hallways. Michael and I thought about walking to our classroom, but then decided to just stay in the room that we were in. I mean, we were in a classroom after all, and nobody probably even knew that we were here. There had been lockdown drills at the school before, so we knew the basics of what you're supposed to do. Turn the lights out in the classroom and lock the door. There was a cover already over the small window in the door to this classroom, so whether the light was on or off, you really couldn't tell from the hallway. So we left it on, and then I went to try to lock the door. However, I remembered that the lock on the door seemed to be broken. I mean, that's how we were able to get in the room in the first place. We figured that that wasn't a big deal though. So Michael and I just sat in random desks in the room, talked and went on our phones, and waited for the lockdown to be over. Neither of us had any idea as to what it was for. Other than us, things were very quiet. We texted some friends trying to figure out what was happening, but nobody seemed to know. Then, I would say about 15 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I was sitting not too far away from the door, so I quickly got up and turned the light off, just in case it was visible at all from the outside. The footsteps continued to get closer, and Michael and I got really concerned. We probably weren't supposed to be in here in the first place, so whoever this was, if they came into the room, we had to hide. Very quickly, we decided to just find a hiding place. Now, there was so much junk in the room that it really wasn't too hard to find a hiding spot. Michael and I took about 10 seconds to get in our places. He went in the far corner of the room behind a cabinet, and I hid on the ground to the side of the desk. The classroom was also very dark, so it would not be obvious where we were. Then, just moments after hiding, the footsteps reached right outside of the door. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Then we heard somebody entering. I looked up from where I was. I saw this man walk in, but I couldn't really tell what he looked like because of how dark it was. I was confident that he couldn't see me though. When the guy got inside of the room, he closed the door quietly, then stood just inside of the entrance. After a few seconds, he took a few steps into the room. Michael and I were both trying to be as quiet as we possibly could. I literally held my breath for a while before breathing as quietly as possible. The man was just standing around a few feet inside the room for a while. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure who this guy was, if he worked for the school, or if he was possibly the cause of the lockdown. He didn't really seem like a teacher, and I didn't know why he would enter this room, so I was starting to think that it was the latter. Then, out of nowhere, Michael made a sound. I think that he just moved slightly. I'm not sure why, but you could just barely hear it because of how quiet it was. When this happened, I heard the man in the room suddenly move a little bit. Then he spoke. The guy said, "What was that? Is somebody in here?" My heart started beating like crazy, but I didn't move or make a sound. Michael did the same. After a few moments of silence, the man called out again, asking who was there. He sounded aggravated and even kind of nervous. Then he shouted, asking if anybody was inside of the room. Michael and I did not make a peep. Then we heard the man quickly walk to the doorway, and the door opened up seconds later. Then the man left. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I'm sure that Michael did the same. We stayed in our hiding places for a while though, just in case the man were to come back. Probably about 20 minutes later, there was an announcement that the lockdown was over. We felt much better. We then left the classroom and went to our final class of the day. Later after school, we were able to find out that the lockdown was caused by a suspicious man inside of the school. Based on what I heard, I'm 100% certain that the man that entered the classroom we were in was the same guy. He must have been trying to find a place to hide, and we were already in there. Apparently, Michael must have scared him off. I'm really glad that the guy didn't try to find us or anything, and just left. This happened back when I was in high school around 20 years ago. I still remember it pretty well though. So I was in a science class during my sophomore year. It was a pretty typical science classroom that was fairly large with chairs and small desks at them. Then to the right was a large lab area with tables and more chairs. For most of the time we would be sitting at the desks, and then like once a week we would do labs. My assigned seat was at the most far back left seat in the class. There were only 2 other kids in my row of seats, and I was closest to the classroom door which led out to the hallway. I was a pretty good student, but science was not my best subject. Most of the time in class, I found myself very bored and my mind would wander. So on this day, the teacher was teaching and writing on the whiteboard and stuff. I was bored and I wasn't really paying that great of attention. I was supposed to be taking notes, but I remember that I started looking around the room out of boredom. At one point, I looked to the classroom door to my left and to the window. It was one of those doors that has a small vertical window that was skinny and not that big. But when I looked over, I saw a man on the other side looking inside of it. It was a grown adult man who I did not recognize to be a teacher at the school or anything like that. He was staring right into the room, and then his eyes locked onto mine when I looked at him. His eyes were somewhat wide, and it seemed like he must be joking around, but I had no clue who he was. I looked around to the other students, and they were all paying attention to the teacher and didn't notice the guy. And where the teacher was, as well as most of the other students were, you couldn't see the door because there were shelves that blocked the view. So I looked back to the man, and he was still there, but then he ducked down and went out of sight. I went back to taking notes and just kind of shrugged it off. But it still seemed like a really weird thing, and I wasn't really sure why the guy did that. But I was still under the impression overall that it was a harmless prank. Sometime later, maybe 10 minutes, the man returned. I'd been looking over to the window periodically. Number 1, I wanted to see if the guy would come back, and number 2, I was bored. When he returned, he just started to stare at me. I looked at him for an uncomfortable amount of time and then looked away. When I looked back again a short time later, he was still there. I thought about alerting someone but elected not to. At the time, as weird as the guy was and borderline creepy, I didn't want to talk in front of the whole class. It would be disrupting to the teacher's lesson, so I didn't say anything. A short time later, the man was gone again. I went back to trying to pay attention to the teacher. Now, literally 5 minutes later, a sound came over the school intercom. Our teacher then announced that the school was being locked down. She turned off the lights and instructed us to get on the floor and under our desks. Then she went over and locked the classroom door. I started thinking about the man and wondering if he was the cause for the lockdown. I was also afraid that he would come back to the classroom. I remember some of the other students whispering to each other, and I told some about the guy. Nobody seemed to know exactly what the lockdown was for, though. It lasted for about 45 minutes, which felt very long. Then finally, it was lifted. We were able to resume with our school day. At first, nobody would say what the lockdown was for, but by the end of the day, the word had spread and I found out. An adult man had actually been stalking a girl who was in my class. He followed her to the school and entered the building and hid inside. It was the same guy who I had seen looking into the classroom. The man was also on drugs, and he was arrested by the police when they found him hiding in the school. It was a big relief for everyone that he was caught. The girl in my class was not even aware of him following her. It's crazy to me that I saw him, and I thought it was just some guy joking around at first. I'm really glad that he didn't try to enter our classroom. When I was in high school, I used to ride the bus to and from school during my freshman and sophomore years. This happened during my sophomore year. I lived sort of at the end of a curving and quiet street. Most people who lived in my neighborhood had long driveways and large properties with lots of trees. The city that I lived in was pretty spread out and rural. The bus did not come down my street, so I had to walk down it and wait at the end. I was also the only person on my street to ride the bus. Generally, the bus would get there really early in the morning. I don't recall the exact time, but it would usually be dark out still when it picked me up. When I got dropped off after school, I would also have to walk the distance of my street. It was not so bad at all though, and the most annoying part was that it was kind of unpredictable when the bus would get there in the morning. It would often be late, I remember, so I would be standing out waiting for a while sometimes. Other times, it would get there right after I got to the corner. The location that I got picked up from was a busier road that mine connected to. It was usually pretty quiet though when I got picked up. One morning, I left my house and was walking down the street to wait for the bus. When I passed by one of the curves in the road, I saw what appeared to be a man just inside one of my neighbor's yards. I knew that he didn't live there, and he was behind one of the trees, and I could barely see him. It appeared as though he was hiding, which I thought was really odd. I only looked at him for like a second, and then I just kept walking. I made it to the end of the street eventually, and the bus got there a very short time later. I was at school after that until I rode the bus home that afternoon. When I got dropped off at the corner, I started walking back to my house. I had forgotten all about the man that I had seen earlier, but when I was passing by almost the same area, I saw him again. It was really strange. He was hanging out in the woods just off the road. In that area, it was pretty dense and would be easy to hide in there. I wasn't sure what the guy was doing, but it looked very suspicious. I guess he could have been visiting one of the neighbors or something, but I was pretty sure that he didn't live here at all. I walked past, trying to ignore him. He was somewhat visible, but also sort of blocked by tree branches. After making it past, I continued to walk, and was a little more than halfway down the street to my house. I remember that when I made it farther, I looked back and noticed the man was now standing in the street. He was slowly starting to walk behind me. I hadn't known that he had even left the woods. It was really creepy to see. I was a long ways up from him though, so I wasn't too worried just yet. I kept walking, and when I made it to my driveway, looked again to see him still walking. He was about the same distance back though. The guy was just wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt, and I never got that good of a look at his face. He appeared to have dark hair though. I quickly walked up my driveway, got out my keys, and went inside. When I was in, I felt a lot better and checked out the front window. The view of the street from there was partly obstructed by trees that we had in our yard. Still, I didn't see him at all. I was home alone for a while until my parents got home from work. During this time though, I didn't see the man at all. I ended up sort of forgetting about him as the day went on. The next morning, I left my house again to catch the bus. I walked on our street, and in another woods area, saw somebody walking through when I passed by. I immediately remembered the man and realized that it was him. I walked faster and passed by the area where he was. When I did, I didn't look over at all, but tried to ignore him. I assumed that it would be a similar situation to the previous day. But this time, when I made it to the straight part of the road that led to my bus stop, I heard footsteps behind me. It was very quiet with it being so early, and I could hear him walking. I looked behind me and saw the guy maybe 100 feet back. He was walking in the middle of the street now. I walked faster and soon made it to where I would wait for the bus. I looked down the street but didn't see my bus coming. I really hoped that it would arrive before the man reached me, but today it seemed to be running late. As I impatiently waited, I looked over my shoulder. The man was still walking towards me and now about 50 feet back. I couldn't wait any longer and I went to the left. I walked along the side of the busy road, which had no sidewalk and really no place to walk at all. There was just a slim margin outside the road line. I walked along this road towards the other street a ways down that I knew my bus went down before my road. It was a ways away, but I didn't know where else to go or what else to do. When I did this, I noticed the man start to follow me there as well. I walked faster and hoped that the guy wouldn't start running after me or something. For a couple more minutes, he seemed to maintain my speed and was like 50 feet back still. I walked along this road until I actually saw my bus up ahead. It was leaving the street that it went down before mine, and then turning onto the busier road that I was walking on. It was a great sight to see. I kept walking and then stopped and started waving for the bus. The bus stopped for me and I got on. When I did, I looked to see where the man was. He was in the ditch and disappeared into the woods, which was about 30 or 40 feet off the road. My bus driver looked confused, but I told him what happened. The man was gone now, but my driver agreed to drop me off in front of my house after school instead of at the corner. So after school, I was dropped off right in front of my driveway. As we drove down my street, I didn't notice the guy anyplace, but he could have easily been hiding in the woods again. I was able to make it inside safely. When my parents got home, I told them about it. They called the police, and I remember that the neighborhood was searched, but unfortunately, the man was gone by that point. None of the neighbors knew who he was either. After that, my bus would pick me up in front of my driveway and drop me off in front of it as well. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that.
I'm a teacher at a high school, and this is my scariest experience from my time on the job. It happened in just my second year of teaching full-time. I had been hired at a high school nearby to where I had grown up. I was really happy to get the job, and the first year had gone well. Most of the students at the school were pretty good. There were a few that were not though, but I feel like most schools that size have them. One day, I was teaching class like any other. After first period was over, in between classes, I would check my cell phone. As I was doing so, I saw that I was receiving a call from an unknown number. I didn't know who it was, so I didn't bother to answer. I put my phone back down on the desk and then prepared for the second class of the day. After teaching that class, I checked my phone again and then saw that the number had left a voicemail. I decided to listen to it. When I played the message, it was what sounded like a younger male's voice, and they were talking in almost a whisper. It was creepy, and the voice simply said, "Answer my calls." Then, literally moments later, the phone started ringing again. Taking the unknown caller's advice, I decided to answer. When I did, I heard that same voice again. He said, "I'm inside the school and I'm gonna get you." Then he hung up. I was really creeped out by this. I didn't know if he was serious or not, but being a new teacher, I felt like I should report it. So I called the principal and let him know about the threat made against me. The principal said that the matter would be looked into immediately. A short time later, a lockdown was announced. I followed through with the procedure for my classroom, and a few minutes after that, there was a knock on the door. Thankfully, it was one of the school staff members to ask me some questions. They talked to me in the room quietly, asking me what happened and stuff. Then they left and said that they were searching the school. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. When it was finally lifted, I was told that nobody suspicious was found inside the school, and they thought that I was safe. And for the rest of the day, I was. Nothing strange or creepy happened, and I had no more texts or calls. After school, I did some grading and some preparations for the following school day. Then I went home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment by myself at the time. That night, shortly before I was going to go to bed, there was a really loud knocking on my front door. I was really freaked out immediately. I remembered the threat that I had received at school. Now somebody was at my house. Whoever was there did not knock a second time. After a minute or so, I very carefully got up and walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Whoever had done it must have left. I was really on edge and thought about calling the police, but I decided not to. I was on high alert for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. It was tough to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next day at school, I found out that the mystery had been solved.
The number that I had received calls from had been traced to one of my students. He was a guy who hadn't shown up to class in weeks. I'm not sure if it was a prank or if he was serious, but he was kind of a troublemaker and hung out with a bad crowd. He had already been suspended multiple times and was suspended again for that. The really creepy part is that I'm sure it was him who showed up at my apartment. I have no clue how he got my number or address. Did he follow me home? That might explain the apartment, but still not the phone number. He was never in my class again, as he got expelled shortly after for selling drugs on school grounds. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. I remember back when I was in high school, during my junior year, a new kid joined 2 of my classes about midway through the semester. It was the first semester of the school year, and out of nowhere he was just in my class one day. His name was Justin, and he sat next to me in one of the classes because there happened to be an open seat. I didn't really know where he had come from or why he had suddenly started going to my school, but as the semester went on, I sort of became friends with him. We didn't really have much in common, and he seemed a little bit weird, but we did sit next to each other in a class and also had the other class together, so he would often talk to me during class, and we would sometimes talk in the other one as well. Overall, I never knew him very well. I did ask him a few questions about himself. For example, I asked him what school he had come from before my high school. I also asked him if he had just moved to the area. He named a school that I had never heard of before, and said that he had recently moved there. But aside from that, he didn't really share much about himself. Still, I was friendly with him, and I didn't mind talking to him here and there. He did get a little bit annoying though, because during the class where we sat next to each other, he would make a lot of comments. I figured that I might be one of the first people that he met in our city though. After probably like 2 or 3 weeks of him going to the school, he invited me to hang out. He said that I should come over to his house that night around 7 or 8. At first, in my head, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to, but I said yes because I realized I may as well hang out with him at least once. After school, I went home, and then he texted me at some time that night to come over. He gave me his address, and I got directions to go there. I had a car at this point, and I drove to Justin's house, which took maybe 10 minutes. He lived in a neighborhood that was not the greatest, but had a lot of smaller houses in it. I parked and then texted Justin that I was there. He did not respond right away, so I got out of the car and then walked to the front door and knocked on it. There was no response for at least a minute. I texted Justin again and he told me to come inside, so I opened the door, which was unlocked, and then went in. After getting inside of his house, at first it seemed like nobody was home. Basically all the lights were off, and I did not think that his parents were there. I called out saying hi, but didn't hear anything back at all. But there was what appeared to be a door leading to the basement that was open a little. So I took a couple of steps inside of his house, and then I started to hear a noise. It sounded like a TV or maybe a video game, but I could barely hear it, and it was coming from far away. When I got closer to the basement door, I realized that's where the sound was coming from. I figured Justin must be playing video games down in the basement because I knew that he liked to play COD. I started heading down the basement stairs. The farther down I got, the louder the noises were, and I knew Justin had to be there. However, it was completely dark down there, and I literally could barely see anything. I didn't know where the light switches were or anything, so I just followed the sounds. Soon, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and headed to what looked like a hallway. I could only see some edges of the walls. As I was walking over there, I loudly asked Justin where he was and said that I was there. But I didn't get a response, which seemed kind of weird. A few seconds after that, as I was walking, I suddenly felt myself getting shoved from behind. I was pushed so hard that I fell forward onto the ground. After falling down, I heard some laughter from whoever pushed me. I looked, but it was so dark that I couldn't see who it was. They also quickly moved away, and I started to get to my feet, but then I was pushed again from behind. Then, when I was down, I got kicked in the legs. I heard more laughter from whoever this was. I quickly got to my feet again, and this time ran away to try to go back to the stairs. I heard somebody else moving down there, and I tried my best not to run into anything. I never thought to take out my phone and use it for light or anything, but I also didn't really have much time for that. After running back towards the stairs, I was luckily able to make it. I sort of tripped over the first part of the stairs, but I caught myself. I then ran up and left the house. I ran all the way back to my car and then drove home. I texted Justin when I got back, asking him what on earth that was all about. He didn't respond though. The next day was a Saturday, so we didn't have school, and the following Monday he was in class. However, I did not feel like saying anything to him and just ignored him, and he did the same to me. Normally he would talk to me and was borderline annoying because I didn't really have much interest in many of the things he would talk about. This day he said nothing at all, and it remained that way for the next few days as well. And randomly after that, he just wasn't in class anymore. He must have changed schools again or something, and I never saw him again. I still wonder what went on in his basement. I believe that was him pushing me, and it makes me angry. I'm glad that I was able to get away though. This happened when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and this was during the first semester. I remember that I was sitting in my history class, and we were just watching a documentary. That's what we did most of the time in that class. So right in the middle of it, the door to the classroom opened, and this random student walked in. She said my name, and she was holding what appeared to be a pass in her hand. So I got up from my desk and walked over to her. When I took the pass from her, it was for me to go to the library. I was confused at first because I was not aware of why I had to go to the library, and I had not been expecting to get any kind of pass at all that day. I showed the pass to my teacher, and then he said that I could go. So I left the classroom and headed out into the hallway. Now, class was about halfway over at this point. The library was basically on the complete other end of the school and was usually very quiet. So I remember walking there, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes in, I heard over the school speakers that we were having a lockdown. Right when I heard this, I wasn't sure what to do. I could try to go to the library, or I could try to go back to my history classroom. It would be a couple of minutes either way. I decided to go to the library. But as I was walking, maybe 30 seconds later, I saw a classroom and I knew that one of my friends was in that class. It was also a teacher that I had later on in the day. So I had the idea to stop and go to that classroom. When I went to the door, I knocked on it, and the teacher was very quick to open the door and let me in. Then I joined that class in huddling towards the back corner of the room. The lights were off, and things were really quiet for the most part. There was a little bit of whispering, and nobody seemed to know what the lockdown was about. However, about 15 minutes later, there was another knock on the classroom door. I think most of us in the room got nervous when we heard it. The teacher went to the door, and soon opened it up. I heard the voice of our vice principal. Then I heard my name get called. I was very surprised and confused. I got up and walked over to the teacher and vice principal, and she told me that I was not in trouble, but I had to go to the office. Now, at this point, even though I was told I wasn't in trouble, I was nervous. We went back to the offices where the principal was and stuff. Then, a very short time later, the lockdown was ended. When I went into the office, I was told some shocking news. Apparently, there was a man inside of the school who didn't work there, and he was the reasoning for the lockdown. But also, the pass that I got from the library was not real. The man somehow walked right into the school and was wearing somewhat professional clothing. I guess that he blended in, and most people must have just assumed that he was a sub or something. He found a kid walking down the hallway who was a teacher's aide, and asked her to deliver the pass to me. He had handwritten the note himself for me to go to the library. After the kid delivered it, the man was waiting around the library for me. What his intentions were, I don't know. I was told about this and asked a bunch of other questions. Eventually, after almost an hour, I was picked up by my mother and brought home. The man had been caught by police after they found him near the library. I had never seen him before, and I had no idea what he was doing. But apparently, he must have seen me if he knew my name and stuff. It still gives me the creeps to think about. Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor, so we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. This happened when I was a freshman in high school. I was a young 14-year-old girl and immature. For most of the school year, things went pretty well. Later on, towards the end of the year, I had gotten used to being in high school. I remember that one Friday afternoon after school, I was leaving to head to my bus. There were quite a few other people around, mostly students also leaving the school. When I was walking along the sidewalk just outside the school, this guy came up to me. I didn't recognize him or know who he was, but I figured that he was an upperclassman, maybe a senior, possibly a junior. He said hi to me and how's it going or something like that. Then he asked me if I was doing anything later. I did not have any plans. He told me that there was going to be a big party that night and said that I should go. Then he gave me an address and I wrote it down in the notes of my phone. After that, I had to catch my bus, and the guy said that he would see me tonight. He told me that, quote, everyone was going to be there. Now, I hadn't known the guy, but he looked like he was probably popular to me, and the fact that he was an upperclassman made him seem more cool. And admittedly, I wanted to be cool, and I did not want to miss out on a big party. At that time, I had never been to an actual party before, just some small get-togethers with people in my friend group, no official house parties or anything. I didn't know why the guy seemingly randomly asked me, but I didn't really care about it either. I did not ask any of my friends if they had been invited either, because if they hadn't, I didn't want them to get mad. So when the time came, I looked up the address. It wasn't that far away, maybe like 7 or 8 minutes. I got my older sister, who was 16, to drive me there. I would always get her to drive me places. She dropped me off in the neighborhood, and it looked kind of sketchy. It was a quiet neighborhood without much lights. I walked up to the property, and I could see a house deep in the yard. In this neighborhood, most of the houses were fairly far apart and had large-sized properties. I double-checked the address, and it was definitely correct. I walked into the property, and there were no cars around, and all the lights in the house appeared off. It was like nobody was home. But I figured that with it being a house party for high schoolers, they didn't want it to be obvious. Most likely the party was in the basement, or else they purposely had the front lights off to not alert any neighbors. As I walked up to the house, I still heard nothing though. It was completely silent. I would have thought if it was a party there would maybe be some music in the distance or something. When I got to the doorstep, I didn't want to knock on the door or ring the doorbell. That's not really something you do at a house party. They would probably think the cops were there or something if I did. I stood there on the front step looking around for a few moments. Then I decided to try the door. When I did, it was unlocked. I slowly opened the front door and saw a pantry and part of a living room. All the lights were indeed off. The house looked pretty average for the most part from what I remember. I stepped inside and started to walk around to try to find the basement. It was still completely quiet, and the farther I walked into the house, the more of a bad feeling I got. I was already a little nervous going to a house party where I didn't think I would know anyone. So, as I was walking in the house, I suddenly heard footsteps. They were coming from the other room and going towards me. I couldn't see who it was, and for whatever reason, my instant reaction was to just leave. I turned around and bolted back for the front door. I made it there, walked out, and left the house. Then I walked back to the street. When I got there, I looked to the house again. I saw a man looking at me from the window. He was not the same guy that I had talked to before. This man looked like he was in his 30s. He had a goatee beard, was wearing a hat, and just looked at me. He didn't say anything or go outside. I walked down the street and then called my sister. She wasn't far away and came back and picked me up, thankfully. She was confused because I had told her I was meeting friends there. I told her what happened and she scolded me for trying to go to a random party, but she agreed not to tell our parents. Now, after that, I never saw the guy who invited me to the party again. In all my years of high school, I never found out who he even was. It makes me wonder if that guy was even a high school student at all. Maybe it was all a setup. I mean, there was definitely no house party going on there. I'm just glad that I made it out of there okay, and I learned my lesson from that experience.
In May of 2018, I was a senior in high school. It was getting towards the end of the school year, and some of us seniors planned out a senior prank. We'd made a group chat with a few of us and planned to fill the senior hallway with red Solo cups. It was a pretty innocent prank. The plan was for me and my friends Tony and Derek to be the ones to set it up. We knew of the perfect time to do it, which would be late at night when nobody else was at the school. The three of us met at the school at about midnight. Tony knew of a back window that didn't close properly, and we were able to sneak through it and into a classroom. We then walked to the senior hallway. Our school was not all that big, and it didn't take us long to get there at all. Tony and I had backpacks filled with cups, as well as an additional bag. It was strange to be in our high school so late at night. It was so empty that it had an eerie feeling. we took the cups and began setting them up. We knew it was going to take some time, but with the three of us, it actually went by pretty quickly. When we had completed about 15 to 20 feet of the hallway, we started to hear a noise coming from around the corner of the senior hall. Because we had the cups set up, we couldn't walk past them to see what the noise was, but we didn't really want to either. Nobody was supposed to be in the school at this hour, but we thought maybe a janitor was working really late for some reason. When we heard the noise, we ran and hid behind a nearby wall. We considered just leaving, but we didn't hear the noises for a while, and the other seniors were counting on us to complete this prank, so we decided to take the risk and go back to work. We kept going and didn't hear any more noises until just when we were about to finish. It was the clear sound of footsteps coming from the same spot as before. We were glad to be done and wanted to leave, but before heading out, we paused and looked over to where the noise was. Then we saw a man appear. He was short and was wearing a black sweatshirt and appeared to be in his late 20s. He just stood there staring at us with a blank look on his face. We knew he definitely did not work at the school, and the three of us decided to take off for the exit. We were able to quickly leave the school and ran all the way back to our cars. The next day when we showed up to school, all of the red Solo cups were messed up and scattered across the hallways. We didn't tell anybody about the man that we had seen because we didn't want the school to know we had done the prank, especially after how it turned out. I assume that the man left the school because we never heard anything more about it, but I still wonder sometimes what he was doing in there.
This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I went to a pretty average-sized school. One day, my third-hour class ended, which I had with my best friend Josh. It was now study hall, which I had in another classroom that was on the second floor. Josh had another class at the other end of the school. Josh and I walked together to our lockers, which were down in the commons area on the first floor. The hallways were already pretty quiet during this time. As we walked down the stairs, we were talking to each other and taking our time. It didn't really matter if we were late to study hall, because it wasn't a real class. You would just sit there and do homework or go on your phone the whole time, and the teachers didn't really do anything. So when we got to our lockers, there weren't really any other students around. We were still talking, and we heard a sound come over the school intercom that was not just the typical bell sound. However, I didn't really hear it. We were mid-conversation, and when we heard some talking over the intercom, we quieted down. I didn't catch it, and I asked Josh what the announcement was. He said it was a lockdown drill, so we continued talking. Josh then said that he was going to his class and walked away. After hearing there was a lockdown drill, I didn't really want to go to my classroom right away. I figured that it would be weird to walk in during a lockdown drill, so I would just stay in the hallways until it was over. The drills usually only lasted like 5 minutes anyways. My teacher would figure out that I just went to another room for the drill probably. So I started to walk slowly down the hallways, taking my time. It was now completely empty and also silent. I did want to avoid anybody else in the hallways though, because I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown drill. As I slowly walked down a nearby hallway, I heard footsteps a ways behind me approaching. So I moved down the hallway and then turned to the left. I started quietly walking down this hallway, which was very long. I hoped that the footsteps would move away. Unfortunately, they didn't. I heard the footsteps continuing to get close to me. I started walking down the hallway as quickly as I could as the footsteps approached the corner, but there was really nowhere to go, so I decided to quickly find a place to hide. I went in between a row of lockers out of desperation. I was out of the person's sight for now, but when they got even with me in the hallway, they would be able to see me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know what was going to happen. The footsteps got into the hallway, and I was sure that it was a hall monitor or a teacher and that I would be in trouble. I decided to look and see who it was, but when I did, it was not who I expected. I saw that there was a man walking down the hallway that I did not recognize. He wasn't a teacher or anything like that, and certainly not a student. It was some guy just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He was walking down the hallway and in my direction, but didn't seem like he knew that I was there. As he got closer and closer, I was starting to wonder what was going on. Maybe it wasn't a lockdown drill after all, but an actual lockdown. The man got within probably 50 feet of me. Then he stopped right in front of several lockers. What he did next was very unexpected. The man climbed on top of the lockers, now standing where he had to crouch to not hit his head on the ceiling. He proceeded to remove one of the ceiling tiles and then crawled up into it, going into the ceiling. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I quickly left my hiding place and then sprinted down the hallway all the way to my classroom. When I got there, I banged on the door and I was let in by my teacher. He asked me where I had been, and I told him that I saw a guy go into the ceiling. He called the vice principal, and I later talked with him about it. The school was locked down for over an hour. Eventually, they found the man. He was a guy who had been living in the school for several days. He was able to move around in the ceilings and in back hallways. The school was kind of old and outdated, and had a decent amount of places he could hide, I guess. It was really creepy. When I was in high school, I considered myself to be a pretty easygoing guy. I had a good friend group, which I would hang out with sometimes, but I remember that a new kid came into our school my junior year. His name was Brad, and I didn't like him at all from the start. He just seemed like an arrogant guy with a really short attention span. I also had 2 classes with him. I just remember always seeing him on his phone during class, and the teacher would get mad at him about it. He seemed to not care about class at all, and also skipped a lot. The few times that I was around him because of a group project that I got put in with him, he did none of the work. He was always making excuses and stuff. And one time, he even said that he couldn't do any work that day because his vape broke. I thought he was joking, but he actually did nothing the entire time that day. So anyways, I tried to avoid him for the most part, but he somehow became friends with some of the guys in my friend group. So I ended up hanging out with him in a group setting like twice. I didn't know he would be there, and he was being annoying the whole time like always. Literally the first time I was hanging out with my friends and he was there in the lunchroom, he made fun of my shoes. They were just average Nike athletic shoes, but a little worn. I didn't care what he thought, but it seemed like he was just trying to roast me to impress my friends or something. So clearly we didn't get along. Then we ended up actually getting into it a little bit during gym class one day. We were playing floor hockey, and I was the goalie and he was on the other team. He basically picked up the goal and moved it to try to score. So then I picked up the goal and I threw it, and then he started getting in my face and some other kids held him back. It was more about the fact that we didn't like each other than we really cared about a gym class game. But I remember not long after this incident, one of my friends told me that Brad really hated me. I already had a hunch, and I said that I didn't like him either one bit. I tried to stay away from him, but sometimes it was hard with us having classes together and mutual friends. I didn't know why any of my friends spent time with him anyways. But one night, I was at home when one of my friends, Jamie, texted me saying he needed a ride. He told me that he was at the high school and told me to come to Lower Law. I didn't really want to go at first, but he told me he would buy me Taco Bell if I did. The school was a little less than 10 minutes away, so it wasn't that big of a deal. I told my parents I had to give Jamie a ride home, and then I left. I think it was about 8:30 p.m. or maybe 9 at this point. I drove to Lower Lot, which was sort of far from the school, but you didn't need a pass to park there. I pulled in and saw one other car in the parking lot. After parking in one of the spaces, I didn't see Jamie anywhere though. I texted him asking where he was. When I did this, I heard someone talking from my left. I looked over and saw Brad there. He was telling me to get out of my car. I was so annoyed to see him, but I wanted to know what he wanted, so I got out of my car. After I was out, his tone changed even more. He walked up really fast and got in my face. It was clear that he wanted to fight me, and he pushed me a little. I told Brad I didn't want to fight him, I was just there to pick up my friend. But after he shoved me, I pushed him back a little. Right after that though, I saw somebody else emerge from behind what I assumed was Brad's car. It was the only other car in the parking lot. I had no idea who this guy was, but I gathered that he was a friend of Brad. He didn't go to our school though. This guy started walking towards me and cursing me out. Now this wasn't fair. If Brad wanted to fight me, that's one thing, but don't bring your friend so it's 2-on-1. I asked who this guy was, and Brad's friend then came up and shoved me. I took one swing at Brad, and then his friend went around and hit me from behind. I fell to the ground, and Brad kicked me in the leg when I was down. After that, I got up as fast as I could and started running off. They immediately started chasing after me. I was a lot faster than they were though. I ran into a grassy area next to the high school, and then off school property into a woods. The entire time I heard them chasing after me, but I was pulling away. After running into the woods, it got very dark. I couldn't see much, but I kept going through trees and heard Brad and his friend reach the edge of the woods. The woods was getting pretty thick, and they called for me to come out, but did not seem to enter the woods themselves. I waited in there for a while and hid behind a tree. After about 5 minutes, I left the woods and didn't see them. I'm not sure where they went, but I went back to the parking lot and both cars were still there. I went back to mine and then I drove home. After getting back, I texted Jamie and cursed him out. He claimed that he didn't know Brad wanted to fight me, and also claimed that he didn't know Brad's friend. He told me Brad told him to say what he did, because Brad really wanted to talk to me and I wouldn't respond to him. It was a lie because Brad never reached out to me at all. I do believe Jamie, but it was still messed up for him to say that to me. Over the next few days, I didn't see Brad at all. He wasn't in classes, and I was happy about that. In fact, I never saw him again after that. He didn't show up to class anymore at all. I'm not sure if he just kept skipping class until he got expelled or if he changed schools again. Either way, I'm glad I don't have to see him anymore. When I was a junior in high school, our school welcomed a foreign exchange student from Romania. His name was Adrian, and he was at our school for about a month. At first, I didn't think much of him. We'd sit together in the cafeteria, and he'd tell stories about his life back home. But something felt off about him. The thing that I noticed was that he would never talk about his family, even though people were interested and wanted to learn more about him. He would change the topic every time it was brought up. One week, we were partnered for a project in school. While we worked throughout the week, I noticed how he always seemed distracted. Many times he'd pull out his phone and type furiously, and sometimes even talk voice memos into his phone, speaking angrily in Romanian. I asked him about it, wanting to make sure everything was okay, but he just brushed it off, saying he was checking in with friends. Also, he began showing up at school with really nice clothing sometimes, or would have something with him which people would wonder how he had the money for that. A prime example is when he showed up one day with an expensive motorized scooter. He never talked about his family to us, but people just assumed that they must be rich and would often send him money or gifts to help him feel more comfortable in a different country. After he began going to school with us for a month now, one day police showed up at our school. They pulled him out of class, saying he was being arrested for credit card scams, which would explain all the nice things that he had. We all watched in confusion as he tried to flee and escape from the cops. It was later revealed that he had murdered and stolen the identity of a boy back in Romania who was supposed to be the foreign exchange student coming to our school. This guy who went to high school with us every day for a month, and we were kind of friends with, was a murderer and committed many other crimes. He was actually 25 years old, not 17 like he claimed. After that whole scenario, our school put the foreign exchange program on hold. It ended up being a tough time for a lot of students who had been friends with this guy. We were all not only sad about what happened to the foreign exchange student we were supposed to have met, but also freaked out that we had spent a month of school with a criminal. All in all, it was just a very strange and scary thing for this guy to do, and I'm glad that he got caught so soon. I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school, and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses, and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view, walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay. This happened back on the night of my high school orientation. So I was entering the 9th grade and would be a freshman in high school. My best friend Josh and I went to the school orientation, and Josh's dad took us there. He was busy talking with another dad in the cafeteria, which was at the front of the school, and Josh and I went to the orientation. There was a thing in the gymnasium where people welcomed us and stuff. Then we went to all the classrooms in our schedules and would see where they were and things like that. We also got a basic tour of the school. The orientation lasted for maybe 30 minutes or so. It really wasn't that long. After it was over, Josh's dad was still busy talking with the other dad. Josh and I decided to walk around the school some more and just shoot the bull. So we walked down the hallways first and looked where each other's classes were. We did have one class together, which was cool. Then we went to our locker area. By then, pretty much everybody else was gone and the hallways were completely empty. We walked through the school and then to this one really quiet hallway. It was kind of out of the way and possibly not used anymore. I say this because it was not shown to us on the tour, and I will also tell you that I never had any classes in this hallway in my entire high school career. So we walked into it and barely any lights were on. Most of the lights in the school were motion activated, but when we walked into this hallway, none of them turned on. There were just a couple of really dim lights at each end. We walked into the hallway just kind of exploring. All the classrooms there appeared to be empty and the doors were closed, although we couldn't see very well because it was pretty dark. We had made it a little ways down the hallway when we heard a noise towards the end of it. Somebody was down there. I figured at first it was probably a janitor. Then we heard them speak. It was a man's voice, and he yelled at us to come over there. I didn't know if we were in trouble or what. He didn't seem angry, but he yelled fairly loud. I also couldn't see where he was. It seemed like maybe he was inside one of the classrooms. We walked down there. As we got closer, we noticed there was one classroom at the end of the hallway with the door open. We knew this is where the guy was. We got to the doorway and looked inside. It was completely pitch dark. Then the man spoke again. He said, "Come in here, you guys." We both walked in, and I literally could not see anything. I looked around inside the door for a light switch, but I couldn't find one. We were just a few steps inside the classroom and stood around. Josh called out, asking where the guy was. There was no answer to that. We were just standing there, really confused. Suddenly, I felt myself get grabbed by the arm. I couldn't see anything, so it really took me by surprise. I moved my arm back really fast and turned around. Josh saw me moving quickly, and he started to leave the room as well. We both bolted out of there as fast as possible. We ran to the end of the hallway and then all the way back to Josh's dad, who was still talking with the other dad. The guy that had called to us did not appear to leave the classroom. We stayed near Josh's dad for the next 30 minutes or so until he was done talking. Then we left. Like I said before, in my entire high school career, I never had a class in that hallway. For the whole freshman year, I would sometimes walk by the narrow entrance to that hallway and remember the creepy experience. It was a hallway that was not used. After my freshman year, they closed the doors to the hallway and it was blocked off. Then, the year after I graduated, they renovated the entire school and either demolished that part or turned it into modern classrooms. Either way, I still don't know who that man was or what exactly was going on there. It still gives me the creeps to remember it though. I remember back in my junior year of high school, we went on a field trip for one of my classes. This was a field trip that took up 2 entire school days. We had gone to an amusement park for a science class, which was a lot of fun. I also missed a test for another one of my classes, but luckily my teacher was cool and let me make it up. So we scheduled a time after school the next day for me to make up the test. It was for Spanish class, and the classroom was towards the end of one hallway on the north side of the building. When I got out of school, I walked over to the Spanish classrooms. My teacher, Mr. Jordan, was in the classroom, and a couple of other students were there as well. I'm not sure what exactly the other students were doing there. I think they might have been making up an assignment or something like that. Mr. Jordan handed me the test when I got there, and he told me that I could take the test in another room. He said the students were going to be talking to him in his classroom, and he didn't want them to distract me. So he had gotten a key to a nearby Spanish classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and said that I could take the test there. So we walked over to the classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and she was already gone for the day. Mr. Jordan told me that he would be in his room if I needed anything. Then he told me good luck and left. I sat down at a random desk and then started the exam. Spanish was a class that I was decent at, but I wasn't expecting to ace the test or anything. However, as I went on with it, things were going really well. I was feeling confident about my answers, until when I was almost done, I heard suddenly the school was having a lockdown. Of course, this was strange, partly because it was after school hours. I didn't know that schools had lockdowns when school wasn't in session, but I guess it makes sense. So anyways, I didn't really know what to do. I could stay there in Mrs. Aceves' classroom, or I could try to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, which was just around the corner. After debating it for a moment or two, I decided to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, so I got up and left the classroom. Mr. Jordan's room was literally right around the corner, like 50 feet away. There was only one classroom separating the two. So after I got out into the hallway, I walked over to Mr. Jordan's room. When I got there, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I was expecting him to come over and open up the door, but literally right after I tried opening it, I heard a noise behind me. It was footsteps, and somebody was walking from around the corner past Mrs. Aceves' room. It was some random woman who was clearly not a student or a teacher. She had really messed up hair, and I just knew right then that this lockdown must have been caused by her. The woman started just walking towards me. Without any more time to wait for Mr. Jordan, I started walking away farther up the hallway. When I did, I saw the woman start to walk after me. She was really creeping me out, and I had no idea what she was doing here. As I walked through the hallway, it was completely silent and nobody else was around. I started walking faster, but could hear the woman still behind me. I turned and went into another hallway, and the woman followed. I was continuing to walk faster and faster, and the woman was doing the same. I didn't want to know what would happen if she caught up with me, so I kept going down one hallway after another. The woman was keeping up with me no matter what I did. I didn't want to risk stopping and trying to go to a classroom because I didn't know which teachers were still at school, and basically all the doors were closed as well. So I kept going. Soon, I made it all the way to the front end of the school. I saw the front doors and I went for them. When I made it outside of the school, the woman did not leave after me and she stayed inside. After that, I just ran for my car and went home. I learned later on that the woman was in fact the cause of the lockdown. I'm not sure what she did, but the police were called for her and the school was locked down. Except the police showed up at the entrance that the woman was seen by, which was not the main entrance that I left out of. I guess Mr. Jordan was literally walking to the door to unlock it when I walked away. He let me finish the test the following day after school, and I'm really glad that the woman never caught up with me. Back when I was a freshman in high school, I will never forget the first ever lockdown I experienced. I was a short, small 14-year-old girl at the time. I had just finished my first hour class and was on my way to second. It was at the complete other end of the school, so it was kind of a long walk. I made my way over there like any other time. As I walked, I remember hearing the warning bell and the hallway quickly got more and more empty. I was still confident that I would be on time to my class though. But then, not too long after that, I heard another bell. I knew that this couldn't be the final bell because it definitely hadn't been 2 minutes since the warning bell, but I was starting to second guess myself. There was an announcement that followed the bell, and I could hear somebody talking. However, our speaker system at the school was old and really bad quality. It sounded like whoever was talking had the microphone in their mouth and I couldn't make out a word. It was just a bunch of nothing. I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I continued walking down the hallways and I was very quickly the only person around. Finally, I made it to my classroom. When I tried to open the door though, it was locked. I was confused and not sure what was happening. As I stood around by the door, I heard a voice from a ways away in the hallway. Somebody asked me what I was doing. I looked over and saw a woman standing there. I didn't recognize her, but I thought she was a teacher. I was a freshman after all and didn't know every staff member yet. After she asked me what I was doing, I told her that I was trying to go to my class. She called me over to her and told me that the school was in a lockdown. I hadn't known that, but now that she mentioned it, it made sense. I walked over to the woman and she told me in a stern voice to follow her. I figured that I was in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown. We walked to the end of the hallway and then to the right around a corner. There was the exit doors and we walked right for them. I was confused as to why we were leaving the school, but I continued following her. Soon we walked right out of the doors. That was at the back sort of side exit to the school. It wasn't that commonly used and it headed out to the east side near the school. When we walked out of the doors, at first we turned to the right again. At that point though, I noticed a police car driving down the street that was in our view, and it was driving towards the school. Almost right after noticing that, the woman quickly turned around and changed directions. She grabbed my arm and we started walking in the opposite direction. I really didn't know what was going on. I was so young, so I wasn't as quick to catch on to bad situations. But by now, I was pretty sure that I shouldn't be following this woman anymore. She started walking over to behind the school and in a grassy area. When we got over there is when I randomly just decided to run away. I just simply stopped following the woman, turned around, and sprinted back for the door of the school. I heard the woman call out to me, but she did not give chase. When I made it back to the school doors that I had left through though, they were locked. So at that point, I ran back around the school towards the front. I saw several police cars there and an officer stopped me from entering the school and asked me what was going on. When I told him, he waited with me by the police cars for the rest of the lockdown. Apparently, the reason for the lockdown in the first place was that very same woman. She did not work at the school or anything. They were able to find her walking on the side of the road about a half-mile away behind the school. I'm not sure if her intentions were to kidnap me or any random kid, but I realized how close I came to the possibility of getting abducted. That was the scariest moment of my high school career for sure. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. I'm a female and was a senior during this time. School got out every day at 2:40 p.m. During this time, for about 10 minutes, it would just be crazy on campus. The school was fairly large, and everybody would be scrambling to get out of there. The locker commons and hallways were very crowded, and then everybody would leave the school. But one day, I was able to leave school early. I was in an advanced class during the final period of the day, and it only had about 15 students in it. We had a really big test that day, and that was the only thing that we had. When we finished, our teacher said that if we drove ourselves to school, we could just leave. Most of the time, even if there was nothing to do in class, in high school the teacher would not let you leave until the bell. So this was really nice, and I got done with my test about 10 minutes before the class would normally get out. I left the classroom and then went to my locker. Then I walked out to the parking lot. During this time, I parked in the main students' parking lot, which was at the west end of the school and also sort of behind it. After leaving the school, I was walking to my car, and it was strange to be leaving without tons of other people around. Normally, there was hundreds of kids going to their cars, and there would be a traffic jam to leave campus. But now I could actually take my time. I remember looking around, but when I did, I noticed something a little weird. There was a small wooded area at the back corner of the parking lot behind it, and there was a man standing there to the side of a tree. He was looking in my direction, and he was wearing sunglasses. It looked pretty strange, because it seemed like he was coming out of the woods. The guy was too old to be a student as well. I looked back to him, and he then moved behind a tree and out of my sight. I continued to my car and then got inside and drove home. I didn't think much more about it after that. But the next day after school, I was walking to my car again. This time, I left school at the normal time with everybody else, and there were tons of other people around. When I was walking to my car, for some reason, I happened to remember the previous day and seeing the weird guy in the woods. Maybe it was just because I was walking to my car again, but I decided to look over to the woods once more, thinking there was no chance that the guy would be there again. But he actually was. The same guy was in the same exact spot, and it was really hard to notice him or see him at all unless you were looking for him. He was halfway behind a tree. I was wondering who on earth this guy was and what he was doing. I kept looking at him as I walked to my car, and the guy seemed to actually be looking at me. Soon, though, he disappeared behind a tree again. After that, I continued to my car and drove home. It was really strange, but I didn't think too much more about it until the next day. This time, when I was leaving school, I knew to look to the spot, but I didn't see the guy this time. He was not there like he had been the last couple of days. The next strange thing to happen was when I left school to drive home, maybe 2 days after that. I was driving back and noticed that this one car followed me almost the entire time. I didn't notice it until maybe about halfway. There was a smaller black sedan that was driving behind me, not really close or anything, but the car did stick with me going into the area where I live, which was normally very quiet. I lived in a large neighborhood, but it was also a very quiet neighborhood. I had to make several turns in the very residential area, and we were the only 2 cars on the road. I looked back and noticed that the driver was wearing sunglasses. Could this be the same man? I didn't know, but it did seem strange. At my street, I turned onto it, and so did the car following me. I wasn't sure what to do at the time. I just drove to my house and pulled into the driveway. Luckily, the car did not pull in after me, and it kept going. I was very relieved. I went inside after that. For the next few hours, things went by pretty normally. That evening, though, I was in my bedroom sitting at my desk. There was a window in my bedroom which looked out to the front yard and to the street. I remember noticing that there was a guy walking down the street. It didn't take long until I recognized him. He was wearing sunglasses, and it appeared to be the same man who was at my school and probably followed me home. He was slowly walking sort of down our street, and I noticed him looking in the direction of our house. When I realized this, I left my bedroom and found my parents in the living room. I told them the whole story of everything. They went to look out of a front window after that. Now at this point, I expected the man to be long gone, but when we looked out of the window, he was actually still in sight. He was walking by, now on the other side of the street, very slowly. My dad then left the house and started walking over to the guy. I couldn't hear what was being said, but it sounded like my dad was yelling at the man. And then I saw the guy start sprinting away. He went down the street and out of sight. My dad came back in after that and said that the guy got away from him. After that, the man did not come back towards our house again, and I never saw him at the school either. But I did report him to my school counselor, so if the guy ever returned, he probably would be caught. I really don't know who he was, but I'm glad that I saw him out of my window that night, or who knows what would have happened. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So, I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes, and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then, I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually, though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. I graduated from high school 2 years ago. I remember that during my senior year, there was a really weird thing that happened that I still think about sometimes. I drove to and from school every day. I got a job when I was 16, and over time, saved up enough money to buy a car. Sure, it wasn't nice, but when I became a high school senior, I was finally able to drive myself to school and not rely on the bus anymore. This was especially nice for me, because I lived almost 15 minutes away from my high school, and riding the bus would take forever. I would have to ride the bus for almost an hour to get to school because of how many people we would pick up along the way. Plus, I had to be up by 6:30 to catch the bus. Anyways, shortly after I got the car, just a couple of weeks into the school year, I left to go home one day. When school got out, the parking lots were always extremely busy. It was just like leaving a sporting event right after a big game. You'd be stuck in traffic trying to get out of the parking lot for a good 5 minutes. I would always try to beat the traffic, but rarely did. On this day, I got done with my 5th hour class, then quickly dropped off my book at my locker, got my keys, and headed for the parking lot. I got to my car, started it up, and left. I sat in traffic for a minute or two, leaving the parking lot, and then finally was on the road. It would be pretty smooth sailing from that point on, but like I said, it was almost a 15-minute drive. When I had first pulled out of the parking lot, there was another car that pulled out right after me. I remember noticing it because it didn't stop before exiting, it just left right after me. As I was driving home, it wasn't until I was more than halfway back that I realized that the same car was still right behind me. I wondered which one of my classmates this was. Maybe it was one of my friends, except most of my good friends' cars I would recognize. I didn't recognize this one at all. As I got closer to my house, I was getting more and more curious. Whoever it was must live pretty close to me. I really couldn't see in their driver's window when I looked in my mirror. Eventually, I made it to my street and turned onto it. The car behind me did as well. I was really surprised to see this. Then I got to my driveway and pulled into it. When I did, the car behind me continued to drive down the street past my house. My street was usually pretty quiet, and I knew that nobody else from my high school lived on it, so I wasn't quite sure who had been seemingly following me back. Still, I just went inside after that. I made some food like I usually did after getting home and forgot all about it. I remember that I stayed up sort of late that night playing video games. I was inside my bedroom, and it was probably like midnight when I noticed a car driving down the street out of the corner of my eye. I didn't think anything of it, but then I noticed that this car was stopping on the side of the road right in front of our house. I paused my game and glanced over. The car was just sitting there on the side of my street, right there. After not seeing anybody get out, I walked closer to my window and looked. Then I realized it was the same car that had followed me home from school earlier in the day. I got sort of suspicious. I kept watching it and eventually saw the engine turn off. Then the driver's door opened and a man got out. I didn't recognize the guy at all. It certainly wasn't a high school student though. The guy looked like he was going to walk right into our front yard. Then he noticed me. We made eye contact for a brief moment. When we did, the guy just turned around and walked back into his car. The engine started up and he drove away. I kept watching from the window after that for quite some time. I never saw him again. I really think that guy must have been planning to break into our house or something that night, but when he saw me watching him, he thought better of it. Other than that, I don't know what he was doing. Why he was at my school though, and why he chose to follow me home, I don't know either. This happened back during my senior year of high school. For this particular semester, I remember that I didn't have a class during first period. This was a common thing for seniors, and it meant that I could wake up late and show up to school when first period was almost over. It always felt really nice to do that because I had been getting up super early for years. So one day, I arrived at school with about 10 minutes or so left in first period. I entered the school and then began walking the empty hallways to my locker. When I was doing this though, I heard over the school intercom that there was a lockdown. Now, I didn't really know what to do in this situation because I didn't have a class to go to, so I decided to just go into the bathroom, which looking back was a stupid decision. Obviously, I should have just found a random classroom, but that's easy to say now. I didn't know why there was a lockdown, but I thought that I could just go into a bathroom and hopefully school would resume shortly. After getting inside, there was silence for a minute or so. Then I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I thought that most likely it was a teacher, and I was slightly wondering if I would get in trouble if they saw me. But I wasn't too worried, because I would just explain how I had just got there and I wasn't in a class yet. The footsteps approached the bathroom that I was in, but they walked right past it. They went down the hallway and got quieter and quieter. I felt relieved that they had passed, but then they seemed to turn around. I heard the footsteps moving back and now heading in my direction again. I wondered why they had turned around. I also wondered who it was out there. I thought about going to see, but just had a bad feeling about it and decided not to. So I stayed where I was, and once more the footsteps got closer, but now they were from the other direction. Once more they passed right by the bathroom that I was in and continued down the hallway. This time they went just out of earshot and then they turned around. Once more they walked towards the bathroom and went past it. Then they passed the bathroom 2 or 3 more times. It was like somebody was out there pacing back and forth down the hallway in front of the bathrooms. I found it really strange, and other than those footsteps, everything was completely silent. Finally, they walked away and I stopped hearing them entirely. So this time, I decided that I wanted to get away from there. I was going to leave the bathroom and just go to the room where my first class of the day would be and hope to be let in. So after not hearing anything for like over a minute, I left the bathroom and went out into the hallway. However, as soon as I got there, I saw a man standing in the hallway right in the middle of it a ways down. The man was wearing a suit and a tie, but I did not recognize him to work at the school. He was not looking at me, but staring straight ahead. And the creepiest part is that he had this really large, fake-looking grin on his face. The whole sight was very unsettling. Then the man started to walk towards me slowly. He still wasn't looking at me and not walking directly at me, but in the general direction that I was in. He remained in the center of the hallway as he walked. I was so freaked out that I just took off running as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I went all the way to the end of the hallway, turned, and then ran down another one. Then I sprinted to the classroom where I had my next class period and banged on the door desperately. After a few moments, the teacher came to the door, saw me, recognized me, and let me in. I told several students as well as the teacher about the strange man that I saw. They all thought that it was really weird, but nobody seemed to know why the school was locked down, but I assumed him to be the reason. We all waited in the classroom for another 30 minutes or so, and then finally the lockdown was over. Then the school day was resumed as normal. The strange thing is that I never got a good explanation as to what the lockdown was for. I didn't get confirmation that it was for that man that I saw, but I can only assume. I heard multiple things, but nothing confirming anything. It was really strange. I'm a female, and this happened when I was in high school. My friends and I used to like to go to the high school football games on Friday nights. We would watch our friends play in the game, and there was a really large student section in the bleachers. It was always a good time, and then I would often hang out with my friends afterwards. One time, I went with two of my friends to a high school football home game. Where I'm from, the high school football games are always a huge deal. Just about the entire city shows up, and it's always packed. Plus, our team is usually pretty good. We got there early and went into the student section. During the game, we mostly stayed there, but a couple of times we got up and walked around. It was very crowded. After the game, we hung around for a little while, and then we were going to leave to go to one of my friends' houses. Then we were going to spend the night there. She lived about 10 minutes away from the school. I was driving, so we got into my car and then started to leave. There was a lot of traffic and a big traffic jam. It took probably 10 minutes just to get off of the main street. Once we were, though, it was smooth sailing, but we noticed that there was a car driving right behind us. When we turned, the car turned after us. We automatically assumed that it was one of our friends from school being funny. None of us could tell who it was, though, because it was dark out. We were trying to guess, but I honestly didn't recognize the car at all. It was just a normal sedan, but kind of small and was black. It stayed behind us for a while, and then we turned, and it turned right after us. It continued to stay right on our tail until we arrived on my friend's street. I drove to her house and pulled over on the side of the road in front of it. The car pulled over behind us. I was actually really surprised that the car followed us all the way back. We were all still convinced at this point that it was a classmate, though. High school kids will do some crazy things sometimes just for a laugh or whatever. So after we parked, we started to get out of the car. I remember getting out and starting to walk over to the car to see who it was. But then the driver's door opened, and I saw a man start to get out. He was no high school kid. This guy was at least 30, and I had never seen him before. Suddenly, I had a really bad feeling, and I think the rest of my friends did too. Instead of trying to run inside or anything, all three of us got back in my car at once. The guy was still walking towards us. I locked all the doors, and the man arrived at one of the back doors and tried opening it. When he did, I slammed my foot on the gas and drove away. My friends told me that he was going back to his car and to hurry. I drove about as fast as I could on that residential road. I went around a corner, and then there was this park with a path through it. I slammed on my brakes, slowed down, and then turned onto the path. It was not a street, and cars were not supposed to go on it, but it was wide enough that one could. I don't know how I got this idea, but I just did, and I drove down the path. The park was not very big, and obviously nobody was there with it being late at night. I cut through this path to the other side where it connected to a street in another nearby neighborhood. Then I took a left, and we could no longer see the guy. He would have no idea of where we were going at that point. I drove back to my house after that, and we hung out there for a little while until finally we went back to my friend's place. That made for the craziest high school football game experience I ever had. I'm currently a high school gym teacher. This is something that happened just last school year. One day, I was preparing for a class that I was about to teach. In the class, we were going to be using the high school gymnasium and doing some activities. For this, I needed to get some equipment such as the orange cones and whatnot. But the school is kind of old, and the storage room for the equipment for some reason is not really that close to the gym. Instead, I have to walk down this really long hallway that's nearby, and there are a few storage rooms towards the end of it. So on this day, I left the gym and walked down this long hallway to the storage room. When I opened up the door, it was mostly dark inside of it. Now, these storage rooms are very cluttered. Things are not organized the best, and there are several shelves and other things in there, so it's kind of big. After getting inside, it was very dark. I didn't even bother to turn the light on though, because I knew exactly what I needed and where it was. However, after taking a couple of steps inside, suddenly I heard a noise. The next thing I knew, one of the equipment shelves was falling over, right on top of me. After landing on me, basically everything fell off the shelf. I was fine, but I was knocked down and covered in random stuff. It all happened so fast, but I knew that somebody was in here and had pushed over that shelf. It was not something that would just fall over on its own. I pushed the junk off of me and looked around. I heard somebody moving away, but didn't see who was in there. I got up to my feet and was about to go back out of the room into the hallway, but when I did, I heard another voice and turned and just barely saw what looked like a man. He moved out of view really quickly, and then he started to push over another shelf. I was able to get out of the room just before the other shelf came crashing down. When I left, I heard the guy going to leave as well. As I was walking away, I saw the door open, and just barely saw this guy coming out of the room. I knew that he didn't work at the school. This was also no student. I then sprinted down the hall and ran back into the gym. When I got there, I took out my phone and reported the incident. The police were called, and the school was put into a lockdown. For the lockdown, I went to an otherwise vacant classroom that was really close to the gym. This classroom did not belong to any teacher in particular, and was used for gym classes as well as sports teams. So when I went inside there, I was all by myself, and I locked the door. As I was inside, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a banging on the door. I had a bad feeling about it. I walked over and removed the window cover to look and see who was there. I saw the same man. As soon as he saw me, he tried opening the locked door. Then he started banging on it again. It was like he was trying to break the door with how hard he was pounding on it. But luckily, the school's doors were very strong. I just went back over to my desk and reported where the guy was. I hoped that he would leave me alone, but I also wanted him to get caught. He continued to bang on the door for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Then the police arrived. They were able to get the man and leave the school with him. I'm not sure how he got in. He had been hiding in that storage room for a while though, possibly as long as a day. I still can't believe that he pushed the shelf over onto me, and I'm glad that I'm okay. Every time I go to those storage rooms though, I still get worried that somebody will be hiding in there. Back when I was in high school, during my sophomore year, I used to go to the local library a lot after school. I lived pretty close by to the high school behind it in a neighborhood. I would walk to school every morning, and then after school there was a city library really close by that I liked to go to. It was in the opposite direction than going home, but it was literally like a 5-minute walk from the school. You just had to cross a street and then go a little ways down. The high school did have a library, but I found it to be kind of lame, and some of the school clubs would meet in there after school anyways, so I preferred to just go to the city library. I would usually spend about an hour or two there, sometimes more. I would try to do all my homework as well as studying there, so when I went home I could then do whatever I wanted. It was easier to focus in the library as well, and I also found it to be pretty relaxing. The city library was nice. It was large, had every book you would want, and also had a lot of tables for studying as well as several computer labs. So one day during that sophomore year, classes let out for the day and I walked across the street and down to the library. I went inside and then went towards the back where I found an open area of a few tables kind of out of the way. There was nobody else there, and it was my favorite spot to do homework at. I sat down, took out my books and folders, and began working. Probably about 10 to 15 minutes into this, and some guy walked up to me. I remember that he had a red t-shirt on and dark brown, really short hair. He looked young, but to me looked like he was maybe 25 or so. He didn't seem like a teenager at all. He did, however, have a backpack with him, so I thought that maybe he was a college student. Either way, I had never seen him before. He walked right up to me, though, and mentioned my high school and asked if I went there too. With him asking that, it implied that he also went to my high school. I had never seen this guy before, like I said, and I wouldn't have guessed that he was a high school student at all. I said, "Yes, do you go there?" He said yes, and then asked if I minded if he did his homework in that area as well. I didn't want him to, but I also didn't want to be rude, so I said sure. And I was only using one of the tables when there was like 5 of them there. He didn't really have to ask permission to be at one of those tables. So the guy walked around me and then went to the table directly behind mine. I couldn't see him anymore now that he was behind me, but I heard him sit down. It seemed as though he was sitting right directly behind me and facing me. I just continued with my homework, and it was completely silent. I was able to work for about 10 minutes or so, but then I realized that I hadn't heard the guy do anything. He hadn't taken anything out of his backpack. No books, no laptop, no notebooks or pencils, and he wasn't making any sounds at all. I was making a little bit of noise with turning pages and writing stuff down, things like that, but there was nothing from the guy. He seemed to just be sitting there behind me doing nothing, and I got the sense that he was staring at me, like that feeling you get when somebody is watching you. I didn't want to just turn around, so I tried to be slick. I stopped to stretch and sort of looked around at another spot behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy. He indeed had nothing out. There were no books or anything on the table in front of him, and he wasn't on his phone either. He was just sitting there, seemingly looking at me. It kind of seemed weird. I tried to just ignore it though, so I kept working. But the longer I did, the more and more I got paranoid. The guy didn't do anything at all. He was just sitting there. I turned around another time, and this time got a better look. He was looking at me and then looked away right after we made eye contact. There was still nothing in front of him, and his backpack was still on his back. By this point, my focus was gone. I could no longer concentrate on what I was doing. I just wanted to leave. I sat there staring at my homework paper for like 5 more minutes and not being productive at all. Finally, I decided to leave. I pretended to finish and then started packing my things up. The man was still sitting there and didn't move the whole time I did. After putting everything back in my backpack, I stood up, picked up my bag, and began to walk away. I didn't look at the guy at all, but when I turned, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing up as well to leave. That's when I had a really bad feeling. I walked to the front of the library and then left. When I was about 20 feet out, I heard the doors open and knew that it was the same guy. I walked quickly to the sidewalk. Then, I breathed a small sigh of relief when I saw the guy getting into a car that was in the parking lot. I kept walking and was now on the sidewalk going home. I went down the street and then crossed back towards the school. Shortly after I passed the school, I saw the same car that the man had gone into driving up the road to pass me. Then it went a ways ahead of me and turned into a small parking lot. This lot was for a park across the street from the school, but it was also used for extra school parking. It was completely empty by this time. As I continued to walk, I saw the car park in a spot facing the street. The man did not get out. I kept walking, just hoping that I would get away from the guy and never see him again. Eventually, I passed it. It was on the other side of the road, so I didn't get a good look at him, but I know he was still inside the car and the engine was still running. Now I just had to pass a couple more streets, and then I would take a right for my street. As I walked, I noticed the car start to leave the parking lot. It backed out of its space and then headed towards the road again. I was walking by several residential streets now. As I saw the car pull back onto the road, I felt like the guy was going to follow me, so I quickly turned into one of the streets that I was closest to. I heard the car now on the other street getting closer. I went down the residential street and then went up the first driveway that I saw. There were some trees in the front yard, so I ran up and hid behind one. I saw the car turn in down the street and start to drive really slow. When it had passed me, it kept going, but I had to wait until it was almost out of sight. Then I quickly ran out from behind the tree and back towards the sidewalk. I made it back to it and then started sprinting for my street. I made it there, but then saw that the car was now starting to go down my street from the other end. It must have wrapped around because all the roads over there connected. I ran back and then went to the next street over and into another random person's front yard. I waited until I could hear the car moving away. Eventually, I turned back to another nearby street. I got up and ran again, this time making it to my street once more. I ran to my house and was finally able to make it home. I got inside and locked the door. Then I watched out the front window and actually saw the car driving by again really slow, but I don't think he knew which house was mine. After that, I never saw the guy again. Looking back, I know that he didn't go to my school. He was way too old to be a high school kid. That was one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had, and I'm glad that I got away from him. When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point, I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I'm a high school teacher, and this is something that happened a few years ago. It's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So it all started one day when I was teaching. I taught 4 classes throughout the school day at the time. I remember during the second period, right in the middle of class, there was suddenly a loud banging on my classroom door. It interrupted my teaching, and I stopped, annoyed, and walked over to see what it was. When I looked out into the hallway, nobody was there. This seemed like obviously a prank by some kids walking by who were supposed to be in class. Some of the students in my class asked about it and thought that it was funny. I was able to laugh it off as well and then continued with my teaching. The rest of the class period went by without any problems. The next class period though, it happened again. I'm not sure if it was at around the same point in class, but it was sometime in the middle. There was a very loud knocking on the door once again. I looked over sooner this time and just barely saw through the window somebody moving away. However, I could not tell who it was at all or anything like that, just that somebody had been there. So I went over to the door, opened it, and looked outside. I was not on time to catch whoever had done it running away, so I went back inside my classroom and then told my class about how it had happened before. Then we resumed with class. As you might be able to guess, this happened yet again during the next class period. By now, I really couldn't believe it, and I was also getting frustrated. I thought about leaving my door open for the entire next class period, but ultimately I did not. And in the final class period of the day, there was actually no knocking, which surprised me but was nice. So I figured that it was probably a one-day thing and that it would never happen again. I didn't report it or anything because I didn't think it was a big deal. So the next day I was teaching my classes again. For the first 3 class periods of the day, they went by as normal. There was no knocking on my door or anything strange. Then, during 4th period, I got a call that the school was having a lockdown. I announced it to my students and started following the procedures. First, I locked the classroom door. Then I turned off all the lights in the classroom and instructed the students to leave their desks and go to the back end of the room. I also covered all the windows. Some students were asking why there was a lockdown, but I didn't know. I was not told a reason and was just told that there was a lockdown and to follow the procedure. The students were supposed to keep quiet, and overall everybody did a pretty good job. I heard some occasional whispers from my students, but other than that it was completely quiet. The lockdown continued for at least a good 30 minutes. Things were very quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the same loud banging on my classroom door. I really could not believe it. The school was in a lockdown. Who would possibly be able to pound on the door like that? I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the small window. Nobody was there. Some of the students were talking about it now, and I told them to pipe down. So, about 20 minutes after this, the lockdown was lifted. Class was let out, and things resumed as normal. There was no knocking on my door for the rest of that day. When the school day was over, I talked with some other teachers because I was very curious as to why we had a lockdown. I was told that it was because a student in the school had made direct threats against another student. That did not really solve the mystery of the knocking though, unless that kid was out in the hallway banging on my door. How would anybody be able to walk around in the hallways like that during a lockdown? And why did they always bang on my door? I asked some other teachers and nobody had knocked on their doors. After that day, I never had any more knocking on my door during class. It was really weird and remains sort of a mystery to me. This is back when I was a high school freshman. I remember that during this time, I would get a ride to school with my older brother, who was a senior. We both played sports, but different ones. So one day, maybe a couple of months into the school year, we both had practice, but mine was early after school, and my brother's was later. When my practice got done that day, it was probably like 5 p.m., and my brother's practice was still going. All my teammates left, except for one. One of my good friends on the team, Jack, was in a similar situation. His brother was also practicing. We sat around and were talking outside of the gym areas for a while. Then we got bored and decided to walk around. School had been done for hours, so at this point, everybody was gone and the place was almost completely empty. We started just talking and walking around random hallways, just kind of wandering around. We were both freshmen and still fairly new to the school, but knew most of the place pretty well. I remember after walking around for a while, we found this staircase that neither of us knew about. It was in an older wing of the school, and there were doors in front of the stairway, but one of the doors was open. We were both curious, so we walked inside and started going down the stairs. They led to, I guess, what was the basement of the school. I wasn't even aware that the school had a basement. At the time, I was thinking it probably wasn't used for anything except maybe storage. When we both got down there, it was really dark. Most of the lights were off, but we found this one switch and a few lights to the hallway turned on. It was basically just one hallway with a few rooms in it. We walked down it and were just looking around. I think we were both just surprised that we even had a basement in our school. We were talking to each other and just looking around, when towards the end of the hallway, we heard a door open. This really startled us, because we had no idea that anybody else was down here. I mean, all the lights had been off, and this place didn't really seem like it was in use. The next thing that I knew, this guy walked out from a room and into the hallway. We both didn't know who this guy was and did not recognize him. He clearly did not work for the school. He was wearing nothing that would indicate that he was a custodian either. The guy had really short hair and was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He looked out at us, but did not say anything. Then, after us both staring at each other for a few moments, the man started walking in our direction. The way that he was walking was sort of aggressive, if that makes any sense. As he was approaching, he told us to come to him. We both had a bad feeling about it though, and just turned around and quickly went back upstairs. After we had made it to the top, we both went away from that hallway. The man did not come upstairs and remained in the basement. We continued to walk far away. For the next 20 minutes or so, we walked up and down random empty hallways and talked about what had happened. Soon though, we got curious and decided to head back, not to go into the basement, but just to see into the hallway. When we returned, both of the doors leading to the basement were shut. I actually tried to open one, but it wouldn't open and seemed to be locked. We then walked away and headed back over towards the gyms. We then waited there until our brothers were done with practice. After that happened, I wondered who the guy was and what he was doing down there. I never saw him again. I also wasn't aware of the basement area being in any sort of use to the school during my entire time there, and I never went back down there again. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes, and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed, so after school it was always really tough to walk through the halls, and the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day, I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before, and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet, and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her, and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation, and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it. This happened back when I was in high school. It was during my senior year in the fall semester. I remember that I had study hall, and during this time I would often go to the library. We were allowed to, but I was one of the only students that did. Most of the other kids liked to stay in their classroom and work there. If I didn't have any homework, I would stay in the classroom myself. But when I was working on stuff, I'd go to the library because it was much easier to focus there. So one day, I was in the library doing homework during study hall. I was listening to music on my headphones, and I was able to finish my homework with a little bit of time left in class. I was going to leave the library early to go to my locker before the final class of the day. At my high school, the rules were not really that strict. You didn't even really need a pass to walk in the hallways during class periods. So I headed out from the library, I think about 3 or 4 minutes before class would be let out. I walked back to my locker, which took a few minutes. Then I put my books away and got the one for my final class. Then I stood around at my locker and looked at the time. Class was out by now, but I was not seeing any students in the hallways. This made me a bit confused. Now I took my headphones out, which had been in the entire time playing music. Things were completely silent. I was really confused, so I just walked to my next classroom. But when I got there, the door was locked. At this point, I still didn't think of a lockdown. I started heading back to my locker, thinking of what could possibly be going on. I hadn't heard the lockdown announcement because I had my headphones in. When I made it back to my locker and saw that the halls were still empty, I checked my watch and phone for the time. My times were not off, and I matched them with the school clock. I just didn't understand where everybody was. Then, I finally realized that there must be a lockdown going on. At first, I was thinking and hoping that maybe it was a drill. So I started to go to my classroom again and was going to knock on the door. My teacher would then be able to let me in. I had to go down a couple of hallways to get there. When I went down one, I passed by a staircase, and I heard multiple people walking down. After I passed it, I looked back, and I saw these 3 men going down the stairs. Each of the 3 guys were wearing all black clothing and ski masks. Instantly, I had a bad feeling about it. I kept walking, and then quickly went around a corner. But when I did, I looked back for a moment, and saw the 3 guys looking in my direction and starting to walk towards me. They were a long ways back, but this was still terrifying. At this point, I could only assume that the school was locked down because of them. I quickly went around the corner and just hoped that the guys wouldn't follow me. But as I made it to the end of that hallway, I looked back. I thought for a moment that I was good. But then I noticed all 3 of the men walking around the corner and coming towards me. I was terrified. I started walking extremely fast to the end of the hallway that I was in. When I made it towards the end though, I recognized a classroom. It was one of a teacher that I had previously had who I knew pretty well. It was a risk to stop, but I decided to. I started knocking on the door extremely fast. I also called out the teacher's name. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. I turned and saw the men coming around this corner too. They looked right at me. For a moment, I was about to turn and run, but then the door opened. I quickly went inside and then shut the door and locked it behind me. The men did not try entering the room or knock on the door, so they must have passed by. but I'm still confident that the guys were going after me until I got in the classroom. The lockdown continued for a while after that. I told the teacher about the guys, and she called it in to somebody. Eventually, after like 30 more minutes, the lockdown finally ended. The 3 men left the school, but were tracked down a ways away. I really never learned much more about it than that. I just know that it was one of the scariest moments of my life when I saw those guys in the hallway. I'm really glad that everybody was okay. The summer after graduation, I took a job as a janitor at my old high school. Over the summer, the school was mostly empty. Most days, it would just be me and a couple of other janitors who worked at the school full-time. Mostly I would work on my own, since the other janitors had big summer projects to work on usually, and I'd be left with the lesser jobs. My normal routine consisted of me cleaning out lockers in classrooms and getting them ready for the next year of school. One afternoon towards the end of the summer, I was cleaning out lockers on my own when I heard someone approaching. The other janitors had told me over the lunch break that they would be working in the auditorium for the rest of the day, so I didn't think that I would see them again after lunch. The high school swimming pool was open for public use during this summer, so it wasn't uncommon to get a wanderer who was just looking for the pool or just checking out the school. I watched as this guy turned around the corner, and when he saw me, he began approaching. He came up to me and asked me for my set of keys, saying that he needed to unlock a bathroom by the pool. Firstly, I wasn't just going to give some random guy my set of keys. Second, there was a lifeguard in the pool who had keys and would have unlocked the bathroom or been able to assist. I didn't want to be rude to the man though, so I told him I could just go with him and unlock the door. However, he refused the offer and persisted that I should just give him the keys and he'd bring them right back. I told him that I couldn't do that and to go to the lifeguard for assistance. Suddenly, he approached me, reaching for my keys, grabbing towards the lanyard that was dangling out of my pocket. I quickly took a couple of steps back from him, expecting him to stop, but he didn't and started to chase after me. I took off sprinting down the hall, scared now, wondering what this guy's deal was. My plan was to race towards the auditorium because I knew the other janitors would be there. However, the man was gaining on me and I had to improvise. I figured that I knew the layout of the school better than he did, so I quickly opened the office door and went inside. I went into the office because it was actually quite a large space and was confusing with many different outbranching hallways as well as 2 exits. As I had hoped, I was able to quickly navigate my way through the office and go out to the second exit into a hallway on the other side, successfully gaining some ground on this guy. The auditorium was still on the complete opposite side of the school though, and I wasn't sure if I could outrun the man behind me for that long, so I decided to hide. There was a storage closet nearby. I yanked the door open and slipped inside, shutting it behind me. I stood in the dark, listening, waiting to hear the man emerge from the office area. Sure enough, about 10 to 15 seconds later, I heard the door open. I could hear him moving around, his footsteps echoing into the empty hall. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to control my breathing and not make any sort of a noise. I heard him walk past the closet multiple times, pacing back and forth outside. I think he was checking classroom windows to see if I had hidden in one of those. Finally, the footsteps faded as he jogged down the hallway, presumably still looking for me. I didn't even bother trying to make my way to the auditorium and other janitors, fearing that I might run into the man again on the way. Instead, I quietly made my way back into the office, using the landline in there to call the police. They arrived soon after, but the man was gone. They searched the school, but didn't find the guy. There were only 2.5 weeks left of summer, so I stopped working a bit early and never went back to the job. This happened when I was a 17-year-old girl and in high school. I played volleyball when I was in high school, and it was a big part of my high school career. I remember that sometimes we used to have practice really early in the morning before school. It was because the gym had to be shared with the other sports teams and stuff. So we would have practice at like 6 a.m. and it would go until about 8. One day I got up early at 4:45 a.m. to get ready for the day. I lived with my parents at the time in a pretty average neighborhood. Obviously, it was still pitch dark outside, and I left home at about 5:30 because it was only a 10-minute drive to the school. I had a car back then that I drove to and from school every day. When I left, I backed out of the driveway, and when I did, I remember seeing a car that was parked on the side of our street. It was sort of in front of our house, which was strange because normally no cars parked on the side of our street at all. And when I started to drive away, the car's headlights turned on and then started driving down the street after me. I didn't really think much of it until I turned off our street and the car went the same way. When I turned again, it did the same. I was starting to wonder if I was being followed for some reason. I did not recognize the car and wasn't sure who it would be. I kept driving to school though, and the roads were very quiet with it being so early. Me and the other car were about the only two on the roads. Soon I approached my school with the car still behind me. I turned into the student parking lot and there were hardly any other cars there. The only other ones were my teammates. I drove around and parked pretty close to the school. The car that was following me entered the parking lot as well, but did not park near me. It went to the complete opposite far corner than me, a long ways away. This made me feel better because it was so far. Plus, now that I was at school, I felt safer because when I got inside, I would be around a lot more people. I was curious as to who was driving the other car though, so I sat in my car and waited for a minute or two. However, nobody got out. The car was backed into a parking space, so kind of facing me, except it was just really far away. I got out of my car finally and then walked inside the school. Then I got ready for volleyball practice. By the time practice started, I had forgot all about the car following me. When practice was over, it was time for the school day. Now, the next strange thing that I remember was after my first hour class. At this time, keep in mind that I had forgot all about the car following me. Now, I specifically remembered that I was by my locker and standing near it talking to some of my friends. When I was looking around the crowded hallway, I saw this guy a long ways away just staring at me. It was strange because I didn't recognize him, and he also looked a little bit older. I just assumed him to be a senior who looked old, but I didn't know why he would be staring at me. I looked away, and then looked again a short time later, and he was still staring at me. I was kind of creeped out, so I looked away again and then left for my next class. During this second hour class that I was in, I remembered that the school went into a lockdown. I had no idea what it was about. The lockdown ended up lasting for almost an hour. At first, even after it ended, no information was given. By the end of the school day though, I found out that it was for a suspicious man in the hallway. Somebody who was not a student, had no hall pass and no credentials or identification. When questioned, he ran away, causing the lockdown. The police got called, and after the guy ran from them, he was arrested for trespassing. Everybody was talking about it. I didn't get confirmation, but I realized that it had to be the same guy, and I think that it was also the guy who had followed me to school from my house. It really creeps me out, and makes me wonder if he was stalking me. When I was in high school, I was really into sports. I played on the football, basketball, and baseball teams. This took place during my senior year and after a basketball game one night. I loved weightlifting and would work out in the school weight room all the time. I remember we had a basketball game at 7 that night, which ended at about 9 p.m. After the game, my coach would always stick around for a while in his office. On this night, we went back to the locker room and coach talked to us like always. I remember that we won the game, and after coach was done, the guys started changing and leaving. I told coach that I was going to go lift, and he said that was fine. So I left the locker room and then went over to the weight room. It was kind of on the other side of the school though, in another wing. The weight room was kind of tucked away, and you had to walk past these janitor's closets to get there. So I went inside the weight room and started lifting. It was nice because it was just me all by myself in there. I was really focused on getting in as good of shape as I could at that point, because I was going to be playing football in college the next year. So I worked out in there for probably 40 minutes or so. Then I was going to go back to the locker room, shower, and drive home. By now, everybody in the school was gone except for my coach and the night janitors. I believe there was 2 overnight janitors, and I knew who both of them were because of my many late nights at the school. After exiting the weight room, I passed by one of the janitor's closets. I'm not sure why, but I looked in. I saw what appeared to be a man hiding inside, sort of behind some stuff. After passing it, I stopped where I was and was thinking, did I really just see that? I almost went back to look, but realized whoever this guy was would know that I saw him then, so I decided to just keep walking instead. I was going to find one of the night janitors and let them know that I saw a guy hiding in one of their closets. The locker room was still a ways away, which was also where the coach's office was. But before I was even out of the first hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I knew it was the guy who I had seen, but I had no clue as to who he was. The school was completely silent by this time, so I easily heard the guy walking behind me. I reached the end of that hallway and then took a right. Then when I was going down that hallway, I continued to hear the guy behind me. I couldn't seem to find any of the janitors, and whoever was following me was starting to get closer. At that point, I decided to just leave. I walked down another hallway to the closest exit. When I got there, I left the school. After making it outside, the man behind me did not follow. I had to walk all the way around the school to the side door, but that was also locked. Luckily, I had my phone, and I called my coach and told him what happened. He came to the side doors and let me in. Then I was able to get back to the locker room and change and get my stuff. My coach told me he would go to see who the guy was in the school and that I should just go home. So I left. After that, though, I never heard what ended up happening. Maybe the guy left the school as well. I'm not sure what he was doing in there. Or why he was following me. I went to a pretty average high school. There were maybe 800 students total, and the school was 2 stories tall with a bunch of classrooms. This was during my junior year. It was a normal school day, and I don't remember a whole lot about the day prior to this. It was my 3rd hour class, which was a history class. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the school, in this quiet and narrow hallway. These classrooms had carpet floors and always felt cozier than the other ones to me. This class was not a standard history class either, but some type of advanced elective. I don't remember the exact name of it. It was a long time ago. But the teacher was really cool, especially with our class because it was a small class. There were maybe 15 of us total in the class, as opposed to the normal class size of like 30 kids. There was no seating chart, so we would sit wherever we wanted. This teacher, who I would call Mr. J, was a pretty cool guy. He had been teaching at the school for many years, and most people liked him as far as I'm aware. His room was rather cluttered, but I didn't mind at all. In the back of it were these large closet type of cabinets, and there were tons of posters on the wall and stuff. He had other kinds of knickknacks and trinkets all around. So I got to my typical seat for the class, which was at the far back of the room. There was nobody else who sat behind me, and I could focus better kind of by myself back there. On this particular day of class, Mr. J put on a video for us to watch. There was a worksheet to go with it, and we all watched the video. It took pretty much the entire hour. Things were very quiet, and the lights were out in the room so we could see the screen better. The only real sounds were coming from the video, which was a documentary. I remember though, during the film, I heard some noises behind me. They were pretty quiet, and I couldn't hear them that well, but it sounded like somebody was in the classroom behind me, but nobody was. I was in one of the last rows, and I even looked back, but nothing was there. It was sort of confusing. The noises continued on and off for almost the entire hour. After a while though, I chalked it up to them being from the next classroom over. After the film was done, we talked about it a little bit and then turned in the worksheets and then were dismissed. I headed out with all the other students and went back towards the locker commons. However, when I was almost back at my locker, I realized that I didn't have my phone. It must have fallen out of my pocket when I was in the history class. Realizing this, I headed back to the room. When I got back to the room, the door was closed. I didn't bother knocking, but just opened it. When I did, I suddenly saw this random guy fighting Mr. J. When I opened the door, he stopped for a moment and looked at me. Then he continued, seemingly trying to fight Mr. J. Mr. J yelled to call the police. They were near the desk, and this guy did not appear to be a student, but did look fairly young. I looked and saw my phone on the ground by my desk. I couldn't call the police because I didn't have my phone. I was just standing there, frozen, unsure of what was going on. The man threw a few punches, and Mr. J was blocking them. Finally, I came to my senses. I went into the room and tried to break up the fight. I went to pull the guy off Mr. J, but he was stronger than me. Mr. J was able to break free just enough though. The guy was big, and also bigger than Mr. J, but my teacher then grabbed the guy and made him fall backwards. Then he got on top of him and pinned him to the ground like a wrestler. He told me again to call 911. I went over, grabbed my phone, and hit 911. Then I ran out and got the attention of some other nearby teachers. They were able to help out and hold the guy down until the cops got there. It was a crazy scene, and the school got locked down for a little while. It turns out the noises I heard behind me were that guy. He was hiding in one of the cabinets at the back of the classroom. I'm not sure why he hated Mr. J, but he did. He must have snuck in there before classes started or something, or if Mr. J left the room for a moment. It's really crazy to think back to it now. When class was over, he came out and attacked him. I'm glad that I went back when I did. Luckily, nobody had any injuries, just some scrapes and bruises. The guy was arrested, and the school day was able to resume as normal. For some background, I'm a 36-year-old woman, and this happened 20 years ago. I was 16 and in high school. I went to an average high school with about 800 students that went there. It was a school that was close to my house, and I enjoyed going there. I had a nice friend group that I hung out with all the time, and overall things were going well for me. Until one day at school, something so crazy happened that it seared into my brain forever. So to explain it, one school day was going by like any other until we had a lockdown. I remember hearing that it was not a drill, and that made me kind of nervous. My mind was thinking of all the possibilities of what it could be, but in reality I had no clue. And this was before every student had a smartphone, so information wasn't quite as fast and we weren't able to just look things up. We sat in our classroom with the lights off and everybody was really quiet. The more time that went by, the more and more nervous I became. I tried to tell myself that everything would be fine. I was safe and in a locked classroom with a bunch of other people. I thought maybe some criminal guy snuck into the school, or maybe some student had turned violent. In reality though, I had no clue what was going on. So after like literally an hour of the school being locked down, the phone rang in our classroom. My teacher answered it and quietly talked. Then she hung up. A short time after that, there was a knock on the classroom door, and I saw the principal, 2 cops, and another man who I didn't recognize. They all looked around the room and then called my name. I didn't know what they wanted, but I got up and walked over to them. They walked with me all the way to the principal's office and told me what was going on. I was told that several students had been planning to kidnap me, and they had stopped it. This was a shock to me, as you could imagine, because I was completely unaware of it. I was told that several senior guys, as well as 2 of their friends who were 19 and 20 years old, were all in on it. They were a group of guys who I was not friends with, but I did know who they were. I had never spoken to any of them, and just knew that one of them was kind of a known drug dealer in the school. They all sat together at a lunch table. Apparently there was this one other guy who was not really in their friend group, but they were cool with. That guy sat at their lunch table and didn't really talk much, but they just kind of let him sit with them. I think he was kind of a loner, or else just really shy or something. Anyways, this guy overheard the other guys talking about kidnapping me. They were planning it out, and it was going to be right after school on the day there was a lockdown. After the kid reported it, the school did an investigation. It was proven legitimate, and they locked down the school the next day and questioned the guys who cracked under the pressure. They were expelled, and the older guys were arrested. I think the younger guys were in a juvenile detention center for a while. The whole thing still blows my mind. I'm just glad that other kid spoke up. Who knows what could have happened? This happened to me many years ago back when I was younger in my high school days. I ended up going to an all-boys boarding school for high school, I guess just because my older brothers had gone there. The boarding school was in the middle of a one-stoplight town and perched on a hill. The school used to be an old monastery, and it was huge, with 4 stories, including a basement that held a boiler room and long winding hallways. Every student had a job to help keep the place running, which we would rotate through. One of my jobs at the time of this story was to clean the gymnasium at night. I would have to sweep the floor and make sure everything was put away and ready for use the next day. The gym had 2 levels. The upper part was for weightlifting, and I could see most of the gym on the upper level from the bottom level where the basketball court was. One night, I stepped into the gym, ready to start sweeping. As I walked farther inside, I noticed a basketball rolling slowly across the floor. I paused and scanned the room to look for anybody who was in the gym or any open doors. However, everything was shut tight and I couldn't see anybody. I told myself that it was just the wind or some random movement, and I was about to start sweeping, but the ball kept rolling. I stood frozen, just in confusion, as I watched the ball roll a complete circle around the gym and stopping right at my feet. Obviously, that's not normal, and I kept looking around to see who was playing a prank on me or to find a logical explanation. I heard a creaking sound and looked into the darkness of the upper level of the gym in the weight room. Suddenly, a girl came into my view close to the railing of the second level. She stopped walking and stared at me. She looked about my age, maybe a bit younger. Her expression was blank, and her eyes were wide. The moment our eyes met, she turned and bolted down the stairs. What came next was a scream that I can't quite describe. It pierced the silence and sent chills down my spine. I backed up against the wall of the gym, very scared. I didn't see the girl coming down the stairs, but watched as she took a sharp left when she got to the bottom and darted through the main door of the gym. I wasn't supposed to leave the school grounds after a specific time for curfew, but curiosity got the best of me, so I went after the girl who had run away through the main gym doors and into the night. I ran onto some steps nearby that had a good vantage point of the surrounding area. I would have never seen the girl again, except for the second scream which I heard out by the road. From my vantage point in the dim moonlight, I watched as the girl sprinted down the hill on the road away from the school until she eventually disappeared into the night. To this day in my life, I've never seen anything else close to what I experienced that night. I still don't know if the girl I had seen was a real person or if she was some type of a ghost or spirit. I have no idea what to believe because the way the basketball had rolled around the gym was very supernatural, but the girl seemed very real. She had pushed open the doors of the gym like a physical person would have, and the fact that I saw her run all the way down the hill was strange. I asked my fellow students, teachers, and brothers about what I had experienced, but nobody knew what I was talking about and dismissed it. I graduated and left that school behind, which has been closed for a while now. I still wonder if any other students had experienced something similar to me before the school was closed for good.
Something really creepy happened to me one time in school. I was a sophomore in high school and randomly sitting in one of my classes. I was kind of bored and started to go on my phone. When I did, I saw that I got added by a random guy on Snapchat. I didn't recognize the name, but I thought that maybe he was a guy who went to my school. The high school was fairly large, so I maybe wouldn't know him. I added him back, and just like 5 minutes later, he sent me a Snapchat, and I was curious as to who he was. So I opened the snap, and when I did, it was not what I was expecting. It was a picture of a classroom door, the same classroom that I was in. I recognized it because my teacher had her door decorated a certain way with her name on it. I sent a snap back saying "what's up" because I thought it was a joke. I figured it to be another student, and I didn't even know why or how he was out in the hallways in the middle of a class period, but I thought he was just being funny and messing around. The next snap was also of the door, but taken from a different angle and a little bit farther down the hallway. It said, "Leave your class." I responded and said, "I can't, why?" The next Snapchat I got from him was a selfie of a really creepy looking guy. He was not a student, but a grown man who looked to be like 50. There was no caption to the photo at all. When I saw that, I blocked the guy. For a short time, there was nothing, and then I went back to paying attention to my class. However, maybe 10 minutes later, the school went into a lockdown. Almost immediately, I had suspicion that the creepy guy who Snapchatted me might be responsible. Still, I didn't hear right away what was going on. The lockdown lasted for what felt like a really long time. I think that it was about 40 minutes. When it ended, I found out that there had been a suspicious man inside the school. The same guy who had sent me those Snapchats. The creepy thing is that I don't know how he got my Snapchat or even knew who I was, and how on earth did he know which classroom I was currently in at the time? That really gave me the creeps. I reported everything to the school and also reported it to the police. I didn't hear much more about it after that though. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again.
I used to walk to and from school every day. This was when I was in high school, and during my freshman and sophomore years. Obviously, I didn't have my driver's license yet, but I also didn't like to ride the bus. We luckily lived close enough that I could walk to school, and we lived in a warmer climate where the winters were very mild. It would take me about 15 minutes to walk to the school, and I had no problem with it at all. We lived in a residential neighborhood, and I would take a couple of sidewalks to the high school. That was basically it. Most days, I would walk all by myself, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, things were very quiet. The roads were not very busy either, other than the occasional car passing by. One morning, I was walking to school like any other day. I would say that I was about halfway there, when I heard a vehicle approaching. To this point, there had been maybe a few cars here and there driving by, but I didn't really notice. So this car I did notice, because it started driving closer to me and slow like it was going to pull over. And then surprisingly, it did pull over. I looked over to the car, wondering who it was. The window rolled down, and there was a man behind the wheel. He asked me if I could use a lift to class. Clearly, I knew better than to get a ride from a stranger, and I said no. The man said something like it was probably a really long walk, but I still said no thanks. At that point, he did drive away. I walked the rest of the way, wondering if the man could have been dangerous, or if he was just trying to be nice. He should know better, though, than to offer random high school kids rides. So after school that day, I was walking home. This was the very same day. So I was by myself on the sidewalk, and when I was nearing my neighborhood, but still a few minutes away, a car approached again. I didn't really think to notice if it was the same one, but I soon realized that it was. The car slowed down and went about as slow as I was walking. Once more, a man rolled down the window, and when I looked, I noticed that it was the same guy. He then asked me if I needed a ride. I told him no again, I did not need a ride. He said okay, and then drove off. I really couldn't believe that the guy had tried to get me to go into his car before and after school. Obviously, I was hoping that I would never see him again, but that was not the case. The very next morning, I was walking to school. Now, looking back, it's easy to say that I should have told somebody, and I should have took more precautions, but for some reason, being a young high schooler, I thought the man would not be back. I figured he would have gotten the hint, and the previous day would probably be the only day that I would see him. So as I walked to school on this morning, I was about halfway there, and I saw a car pass me by, which looked like the man's car. I got a bad feeling. The car passed me though, and for a moment I felt relieved. But then the car pulled over to the side of the road, about 40 or 50 feet in front of me. And this time, it completely pulled over. It stopped, and it looked like the engine was turning off. I had a terrible feeling. It seemed as though the man may get out. So I quickly turned and went into a random person's front yard. The sun was still sort of rising, so it was mostly dark out. I then went into the neighbor's backyard, and then cut through a few more properties. I knew the area really well, and I continued to cut through more people's yards and take random streets. I was able to make it all the way to school like that, and did not see the man or his car for the rest of the way. When I got to school, I called my mom and told her about it, and I also told all my school friends throughout the day. Everybody was concerned for me and said that I should not walk home that day. My mom was working and offered to leave her job early, but I was able to get a ride with my friend Amanda. So after school, I rode on Amanda's bus with her and went to her house. The bus didn't go to my house at all, because we had told the school that I was not going to be using it, so I wasn't assigned to a bus at all. So my mom picked me up from Amanda's, and then we contacted the school so I could be on a bus. After that, I rode the bus to and from school every day for the rest of the semester. Then I was able to get my driver's license and drove to school for the rest of my high school career. Luckily, I never saw that man again.
I was in my junior year of high school, just trying to get through my classes like everybody else. One afternoon in school, I got a text from an unknown number. The text said, "I see you." At first, I thought it was a prank from a friend or even from somebody who didn't like me, so I laughed it off and ignored it. But the next day, another message came through which said, "You're not safe." I didn't recognize the number, and it didn't seem like anybody from my school. The messages kept coming, with each one being more disturbing than the last, saying things like, "I know where you go to school," and "You can't hide from me." I wanted to tell somebody, but I had no idea who it was or if anything could be done. The next day, I sat in class doing my work, and I noticed Mr. Thompson, my history teacher, watching me more than usual. He was a strict teacher, so I just tried to ignore him, not wanting to get in trouble for something that I didn't know I was doing. As the week went on, the messages became more personal. I'd get sent stuff like, "I see you in the library," or "You're mine." The following Monday, I finally told our guidance counselor about it. After lunch, I decided to go to the library to read. It was while I was reading there that I had a realization moment. My teacher, Mr. Thompson, was also in the library grading papers. I hadn't noticed him before, but it now felt like he was watching me. Every time I looked up, he was glancing in my direction.
I never expected the text that I was receiving to be from a teacher, but I was beginning to suspect him now. I decided to confront Mr. Thompson after class the next day. I questioned him about if he was sending creepy texts to me, also bringing up that I had seen him watching me in the library. His expression changed, and he got very defensive, saying that he didn't know what I was talking about, and told me to leave his classroom. Immediately after talking to him, I went to the principal's office and said I suspected Mr. Thompson of being the one who was sending me all those texts. The next day when I showed up for school, he was gone. The school announced he had taken a leave of absence for personal reasons and didn't give me any other explanation. He never came back to the school, at least the rest of the time that I was there. I never found out what happened to him, but the texts did stop the day he disappeared.